The faded blue dress lay across Lady Ottilie Lydgate's bed like an accusation before anyone had spoken a word. It was not torn, not stained, not indecent, and therefore not one of the disasters her father could name with any satisfaction. That made it worse. Its muslin had faded from summer blue to the color of a tired April sky, and the cuffs had been mended so carefully that only a woman accustomed to hiding damage would have noticed the stitches. Ottilie noticed them. She knew everyone. She had set most of them herself during winter evenings, when the fire had been allowed to burn low, because Sir Barnabas Lydgate disliked waste in any room that did not hold guests. Outside the tall windows of Lydgate House, London moved through the late afternoon, with the soft thunder of carriage wheels, the calls of chairmen, and the muffled clatter of servants preparing other people's glittering evenings. Inside her bedchamber, the air smelled faintly of lavender water, old paper, and the crushed stems tucked between the pages of her sketchbook. The house below was already sharpening itself for display. Silver had been brought out. The dining room candles had been counted twice. Her father's best claret had been ordered from the cellar, though he had complained for 3 months about the cost of shoeing the carriage horses. An important guest was coming. Sir Barnabas had used the phrase 4 times at breakfast, twice at luncheon, and once through the closed door of Ottilie's room, as though repetition might hammer importance into obedience. She looked at the gowns arranged by Nancy across the chair. White silk with seed pearls at the bodice, pale primrose gauze that made her look bloodless, a rose satin dress that belonged more properly to a girl who laughed easily and believed compliments before testing them for cruelty. All acceptable, all ornamental, all chosen to make her disappear in a more fashionable way. Ottilie reached for the faded blue muslin instead. Her maid stopped with a ribbon between her fingers. "Lady Ottilie," Nancy whispered, as if the gown itself might report them. "Sir Barnabas," said the primrose. "I heard him. He said the guest is a gentleman of consequence. Then I hope the gentleman has survived worse trials than a plain dress." Nancy's mouth twitched, but worry quickly smoothed it away. She was small, quick-handed, and too young to have learned how often kindness made one vulnerable in a house like this. Ottilie had protected her twice from dismissal already, once over a chipped basin, and once over a misplaced glove that had later been found under Lady Sabella Crane's chair after a morning call. Sir Barnabas called such protection interference. Ottilie called it the only authority she possessed. She lifted the blue dress and held it before her. The muslin fell softly, without the proud rustle of silk. It had pockets deep enough for a pencil stub, a folded handkerchief, and the small card on which she had pressed a harebell 2 summers ago. In society's eyes, a pocket was useful only when invisible. Ottilie had always liked them for that reason. "It is your oldest day dress," Nancy said. "It is my most honest one. He'll be angry. My father is often angry. It gives him occupation." Nancy lowered her eyes, but not before Ottilie saw the fear in them. That steadied her more than defiance could have done. She took the maid's hand for a moment, not grandly, not like a mistress bestowing comfort, but like one woman warning another that the household below them was growing teeth. "If he asks, I chose it. You pressed what I gave you. Nothing more. He'll say I should have stopped you. Then I shall say, you are not employed to govern my conscience. Miss, don't make him worse tonight." The plea landed, more sharply because Nancy had forgotten the title. Ottilie softened. "I shall not make him anything. He has managed himself badly for years without my assistance." Yet when Nancy helped her into the gown, Ottilie felt the familiar pull of consequences tightening at the back of her neck with the hooks. The dress did not flatter her in the approved manner. It did not lift the eye toward her complexion, disguise the firmness of her chin, or soften the thoughtful directness that Sir Barnabas insisted made gentlemen uneasy. It simply allowed her to breathe. At 26, breathing had become a kind of private rebellion. The looking-glass showed a tall young woman with brown hair, parted plainly grey eyes that learned not to widen at insults, and hands too often inked by pencil, leaf stain, or the dust of old books. Not a beauty, not a failure, not an ornament. The distinction mattered, though few in London seemed inclined to notice it. On the little table beside the glass lay her sketchbook, half hidden beneath a shawl. She opened it to the newest page, a harebell, a sprig of rosemary, and the early outline of a foxglove she had not yet finished. Her mother's old botanical manuals had taught her what no governess had thought necessary, that a leaf could be named without being possessed, that beauty often grew in ditches, that danger and remedy sometimes lived in neighbouring stems. Lady Marianne Lydgate had died when Ottilie was 12, leaving behind 3 manuals, a box of pencils, and a patience Ottilie had never been able to imitate. Sir Barnabas had left the books in a lumber room for years, as if knowledge might decay if neglected. It had not. Ottilie took the pressed harebell card from between the pages. The tiny blue bell was dry and fragile, its colour faded but not gone. Beneath it, in her own neat hand, were the initials OL and a correction to a Latin name, once printed wrongly in a circulating library volume. 3 years ago, a gentleman had found her writing that correction in the margin of her own notebook and had asked her opinion as though it were a thing worth having. Not her fortune, not her age, not her complexion in candlelight, her opinion. He had been dark-haired, controlled, and quietly amused, with a voice that made mockery seem impossible because it had no need to prove itself. She had loved him for 10 minutes, which was absurd. She had remembered him for 3 years, which was worse. She did not know his name. She only knew that when he had bowed over her borrowed book, he had said, "A lady who corrects a botanist should never look apologetic." She had looked apologetic anyway. It was one of her many early failures. A hard knock struck the door. Nancy flinched. Ottilie slid the harebell card into the pocket of the blue dress and closed the sketchbook. "Come in." Sir Barnabas entered without waiting, as he always did in rooms he paid for. He was a broad-shouldered man gone heavy with self-importance rather than age, his hair silvering at the temples in a manner he believed distinguished. His gaze went first to the primrose gown on the chair, then to the dress on Ottilie's body. The silence that followed was not empty. It filled with the sound of all the things he would not say in front of servants if he could help it. "What?" he asked at last. "Are you wearing a gown, sir? Do not be clever." "Then I am wearing the blue muslin." "You are wearing insolence stitched into poverty." Nancy bowed her head over a tray of pins. Ottilie kept her shoulders still. That was the first lesson of surviving her father. Never give his temper movement to chase. It is clean. It is modest. It is mine. It is an insult to this house. I had understood houses were more difficult to insult than people. His face darkened. "There will be no display of your peculiar humour this evening. Lady Sabella Crane is joining us. She has been educated to understand what is due to consequence." Ottilie did not answer. Lady Sabella understood consequence very well. She wore it in pale silk, collected it in compliments, and spent it like a currency Wherever unmarried men of rank appeared, she also had the talent, rare and deadly, of making cruelty sound like concern. Our guest, Sir Barnabas continued, lowering his voice, is not one of your father's old card companions or some country rector to be endured. He is a man whose notice may alter the prospects of every person in this house. Then perhaps every person should behave honestly. Honesty does not excuse ugliness. Something in Ottilie's chest tightened, but it did not break. It had been trained not to. She looked at herself once more in the glass, the faded gown, the simple braid, the face her father had spent years teaching her to doubt. No, she said quietly, nor does silk excuse unkindness. Nancy's fingers froze on the ribbon. Sir Barnabas stared as though Ottilie had slapped the wallpaper. For one wild moment, she thought he might send her to her room like a child, and thereby save her from dinner altogether. But social ambition was stronger than paternal rage. He stepped closer instead. Listen carefully. You will not speak of plants, books, translations, household accounts, or any other unfeminine occupation. You will not correct anyone. You will not drift toward corners like a governess awaiting instruction. You will stand where I place you, answer when addressed, and remember that a silent daughter is still better than a ridiculous one. And if I fail? His gaze moved to Nancy, then back to her. Then I shall begin economizing where indulgence has been mistaken for necessity. Nancy went white. Ottilie understood at once. Her father could not easily strike at Ottilie's conscience anymore, so he had learned to strike beside it. Dismiss Nancy. Cut wages. Send a loyal maid away without character. Punish kindness until obedience looked merciful. Ottilie folded her hands before her so he would not see them curl. Nancy has done nothing except dress me as instructed. Then instruct her better by your example. He turned toward the door, then paused, and remove whatever nonsense you have hidden in your pocket. A gentleman does not come to dinner to admire weeds. When he left, the room seemed to breathe out around him. Nancy's eyes shone with tears she would not shed. Ottilie crossed to the looking-glass again, drew the harebell card from her pocket, and held it between two fingers. Fragile, faded, persisting, like the dress, like memory, like the part of herself no one had managed to make decorative enough to sell. Shall I put it away? Nancy asked. Ottilie looked down at the pressed blue bell and thought of the unknown gentleman in the circulating library. A lady who corrects a botanist should never look apologetic. She had not known then how much a sentence could live in a person. No, she said, sliding the card back into her pocket. Leave it where it is. But if Sir Barnabas sees it, then he will learn that pockets are treacherous things. A reluctant laugh escaped Nancy, small but real. Ottilie smiled for her sake, then turned toward the door. The house had changed while she dressed. She could hear the deeper rhythm of arrival below. The opening of the front door, the butler's measured dignity, the faint lift in servants' voices when rank crossed a threshold. Lady Sabella's laugh floated up first, polished and bright as a glass bead. Then her father's voice, thick with welcome. Ottilie descended the staircase slowly. One gloved hand on the rail, the blue skirt brushing each step without the fashionable whisper of silk. On the landing, she paused beneath her mother's portrait. Lady Marianne had been painted in white, holding a book no one believed she had read. Ottilie had always hated the lie of it. I am sorry, she murmured, though she was not certain whether she spoke to the portrait, the dress, or the girl she had been. When she first learned that love in a house could be rationed like coal, the butler appeared at the foot of the stairs, his face composed but his eyes alert. with the importance of the moment. Behind him, candlelight spilled from the drawing room in a golden rectangle. Ottilie heard Sabella say something about the charming severity of botanical study, and a gentleman answered too low for the words to carry. That voice. Ottilie stopped breathing. Memory rose before reason could stop it. A library table, a wrongly named plant, a dark head bent over a page. A question asked as if her mind mattered. The butler turned toward the drawing room and announced with formal gravity, "His Grace, the Duke of Haverston." For one dreadful second, Lady Ottilie Lydgate believed memory had become unkind enough to step out of the past and bow in her father's drawing room. The gentleman by the marble hearth turned at the butler's announcement, and candlelight found the same dark hair, the same controlled mouth, the same eyes that seemed to observe before they judged. Only now every detail had a name attached to rank. His Grace, Ivo Marset, Duke of Haverston. Not a quiet gentleman from a circulating library, not a scholar passing an hour among badly printed botanical volumes. A duke. Her hand tightened on the stair rail. The pressed harebell card in her pocket seemed suddenly heavier than paper, and dried petals had any right to be. Below, Sir Barnabas gave a laugh too loud to be natural. "Ah, there she is. My daughter, Lady Ottilie Lydgate. You must forgive her delay, Your Grace. Ladies often require half the evening to prepare, though one would not know it from the result." Lady Sabella Crane lowered her painted floral fan just enough for Ottilie to see the smile behind it. Sabella wore pale silk embroidered with tiny white blossoms, each one chosen to flatter without appearing vain. She looked like a woman arranged by a careful mother, a clever modiste, and a dozen mirrors. Ottilie, in faded blue muslin, felt the distance between them widen before she reached the final stair. It would have been easier if Ivo Marset had laughed. Easier still if he had looked past her. She knew what to do with dismissal. She had lived on it for years. But the Duke did neither. His gaze moved from her face to the worn gown, then to her hands, then back to her face with a stillness that altered the room. He did not look amused. He did not look disappointed. He looked as if he had heard a note he recognized from a long, silent instrument. Ottilie curtsied, because her body remembered propriety even when her thoughts had scattered. "Your Grace, Lady Ottilie." His voice was lower than she remembered, but not changed. "Not enough. I believe we have met before." Her father's smile faltered. "Impossible. I would remember such an honor." "Perhaps the honor was not yours, Sir Barnabas." The words were mild. The room chilled around them. Sabella's fan paused. Ottilie felt heat rise beneath her collar. She should have denied it. She should have protected herself with ignorance, as any sensible woman would when standing in an old dress before a duke and a father determined to be ashamed of her. Instead, the truth moved before caution. "At Morrow's circulating library, I think." Ivo's eyes warmed by a fraction. "Beside a volume that had offended you, only its publisher, and its Latin." The Latin was also at fault. The corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, something more dangerous because it suggested memory. Sir Barnabas cleared his throat. "My daughter has always had an unfortunate habit of correcting books no one asked her to read. Lady Sabella, however, has been speaking most charmingly of the charity breakfast next week. She has taken a great interest in the arrangement of flowers." "How useful," Ivo said. He did not turn from Ottilie. "Flowers forgive many arrangements. Plants are less indulgent." Ottilie looked down before her expression betrayed her. Sabella's fan opened fully with a soft snap. "How very learned that sounds, Your Grace." Lady Ottilie has always had a fondness for little rural things. It is brave of her to bring them into a drawing-room. Brave? Ivo repeated. I had thought it sensible. Sir Barnabas's brows drew together. Sensible? A room may be improved by one honest thing. No one moved. Ottilie could hear the fire settling in the grate. She could also hear the faint rustle of Nancy somewhere beyond the door, waiting to be called, perhaps praying no one would be dismissed before soup. Ottilie should have felt defended. Instead, she felt exposed in a new and unfamiliar way, because Ivo had not merely contradicted Sabella. He had seen the intention beneath the insult. Sir Barnabas recovered with the briskness of a man determined to drag the conversation back to safer ground. You are generous, Your Grace. Ottilie's interests are harmless enough when kept out of company. Come, child, do not hover. Lady Sabella has been kind enough to sit near the hearth. You may take the chair by the screen. The chair by the screen was half in shadow and farthest from the Duke. It was the place for elderly aunts, companionable widows, and daughters whose presence was required, but whose voice was not. Ottilie had taken such chairs all her life. She moved toward it automatically. Ivo stepped aside from the hearth. Lady Ottilie, would you be so good as to sit here? I have a question I would rather not ask across the room. It was done lightly, perfectly. No impropriety, no command that could be challenged. A duke's request dressed as courtesy. Sir Barnabas could not refuse without looking absurd. Sabella's smile thinned. Ottilie crossed to the chair nearer the fire and sat with her hands folded over the faded blue skirt. The muslin looked even older in the gold light. It did not shine, it did not flatter, it simply existed, stubborn and plain. Ivo took the chair opposite, not too near, but near enough that she could see the fine line of concentration between his brows. You carried a specimen card at Morrow's, he said. I remember thinking you had pressed the flower with more discipline than the bookbinder had used on the volume. Ottilie felt the harebell in her pocket like a secret listening. That is a severe judgment on the bookbinder. He had earned it. It was a harebell, I know. The quiet certainty of it startled her. You know. You wrote the name in the margin of your own notebook. Sir Barnabas gave a short laugh. Your Grace must have a remarkable memory. For useful corrections, yes. Ivo's gaze remained steady. Do you still collect specimens, Lady Ottilie? Sir Barnabas answered before she could. She sketches. A harmless pastime, though one hopes it will not become an eccentricity. There is always danger when young women mistake accomplishments for occupations. I am not certain ignorance is safer, Ottilie said. Her father's eyes cut toward her. Too late, she remembered the warning upstairs. Do not speak of plants, books, translations, household accounts, or any other unfeminine occupation. Ivo seemed to notice the sudden restraint that closed around her. Nor am I, he said. In fact, I have relied more than once on a careful drawing to prevent a foolish mistake. Sabella leaned forward, silk whispering. How fascinating! Though surely one hires men for such precision. Gardeners, physicians, those sorts of people. One hires skill where one finds it, Ivo replied. Rank does not improve a bad observation. Ottilie almost looked at him then, truly looked, but fear checked her. A woman could survive insults more easily than hope. Hope asked to be fed. Sir Barnabas's voice sharpened beneath its polish. Ottilie, since his Grace has been kind enough to indulge your little enthusiasm, perhaps you might show him the card. If you have indeed brought Field refuse to my drawing-room, let us make the most of it. There it was, the trap beneath the permission. If she refused, she appeared rude. If she obeyed, She became the ridiculous daughter displaying weeds before a duke. Sibella's eyes brightened above her fan. Ottilie's fingers moved to her pocket. For a moment, the harebell was not a specimen, but a piece of herself, dry and breakable, gathered on a day when no one had needed her to be useful. She drew it out. The card trembled once in her hand, barely enough to be seen. Ivo saw. He extended his hand, palm open, waiting. Not taking, waiting. Ottilie placed the card into his fingers. For the briefest instant, her gloved fingertips brushed his. A small accident. Nothing that any person in the room could condemn. Yet the contact moved through her with startling clarity. Not heat, not impropriety, but recognition sharpened by years of silence. He withdrew at once, as a gentleman should, and looked down at the pressed flower with such grave attention that the room's mockery faltered. Campanula rotundifolia, he said, though harebell is the kinder name. Ottilie found herself answering before she remembered to be careful. Common names often have better manners than Latin. This time he smiled. It was brief, but it changed his face completely. The cold authority remained, yet beneath it lived amusement, intelligence, and something almost gentle. That, he said, is the sort of sentence I have wondered about for 3 years. Her breath caught. Sibella's fan stilled. Sir Barnabas looked from the Duke to Ottilie, as if a household chair had begun speaking Greek. Wondered, Ottilie repeated, too softly. I have wondered who corrected my plant name. Your plant name. The note you made was on a passage I had quoted badly in a letter to the editor. I saw your correction before the librarian scolded you for marking your own paper too near his precious volume. You were the letter writer, guilty. You made a very elegant mistake. I've made several. That one, at least, introduced me to a better mind. The words were not loud. They were not a declaration. They were only conversation, and yet the room seemed to rearrange itself around them. Ottilie felt her father's displeasure like a hand closing at the back of her neck. Sibella looked at the faded blue dress again, but now her expression held calculation instead of simple contempt. The dress had failed to make Ottilie invisible. Worse, it had made her memorable. Sir Barnabas rose with forced cheer. Dinner will be served directly. Lady Sibella, you must allow me to escort you. Your Grace, you will find her knowledge of the charitable arrangements most refreshing. Ivo stood because everyone did. He returned the harebell card to Ottilie, placing it carefully in her hand, this time without touching her fingers. Keep this safe, Lady Ottilie. It is only a pressed flower. No, he said quietly, as the others began to move toward the dining room. It is evidence that you were paying attention before anyone had the sense to ask you. Ottilie closed her fingers over the card. Across the room, Sibella's smile returned, bright and thin. How brave of Lady Ottilie, she said, to bring weeds to a duke. Ivo turned toward her at last. His expression remained perfectly courteous. That made it more devastating. Not weeds, Lady Sibella. A weed is merely a plant judged by the wrong company. Then he offered his arm to the dowager's empty place in custom, by gesture stepped aside for Ottilie to pass before him, and left the room, silent enough for every person in it to hear the faded blue muslin brush the floor. Dinner did not begin with soup. It began with a test. Lady Ottilie Lydgate understood that before the footman had finished drawing back the chairs, before her father took his place at the head of the table, before Lady Sibella Crane arranged her pale skirts with the graceful precision of a woman who had never once been asked to make herself smaller. The test lay in the seating. Sir Barnabas had placed Sibella at his right. where candlelight warmed her complexion and the silver epergne framed her like a portrait. The Duke of Haverston sat opposite, a position of honor from which every expression might be observed. Ottilie was set lower down, not quite at the foot, not quite among the forgotten, but near enough to the screen that a careless guest could overlook her without seeming rude. It was a familiar arrangement. Her father had always possessed a talent for making exclusion look like etiquette. Yet, as Ottilie took her chair, the harebell card tucked safely back into the pocket of her faded blue dress, she saw Ivo Marset glance once at the distance between them. He said nothing. That was the first mercy. If he had objected aloud, her father would have smiled, obeyed, and punished her later for needing defense. Instead, the Duke merely let his gaze rest on her for a single breath, long enough for her to know he had noticed, not long enough for anyone else to accuse him of notice. That quietness unsettled her more than open gallantry. Open gallantry could be performed. Attention could not. The soup was served, pale and fragrant, with herbs from a kitchen garden Sir Barnabas never visited, and conversation arranged itself around safe subjects: weather, roads, the Prince Regent's entertainments. A duchess who had recently dismissed a French cook for over-salting a sauce. Sibella laughed at the proper moments and lowered her eyes at the improper ones, making herself charming by measurement. Ottilie ate carefully and spoke only when politeness required it. She felt her father's warning still lodged beneath her ribs. No books, no plants, no corrections, no thoughts that might leave marks. Sir Barnabas turned at last to the Duke with the expression of a man presenting a prize he had not yet paid for. Lady Sibella has been most active in the arrangements for next week's charity botanical breakfast, Your Grace. Her taste in floral display is widely admired. You are generous, Sir Barnabas, Sibella said. I only hope to make beauty useful. A noble ambition, Ivo replied. His tone was courteous, but his eyes did not warm as they had in the drawing-room. Beauty is often praised for doing nothing at all. Sibella's smile flickered. Then I shall endeavor to surprise you. I look forward to being surprised. Ottilie looked at her spoon, but not before she caught the faintest movement at the corner of his mouth. She should not have found it comforting. She did. Alpheus Crane, seated beside his sister, leaned back with a wine-glass in hand. He was a handsome man, in the narrow fashion of those who believed good tailoring could stand in for character. His coat was excellent. His eyes were quick. Ottilie had seen him twice before, always near gaming rooms, always smiling at men who looked uneasy afterward. Lady Ottilie must be invaluable in such arrangements, he said. A lady with such a passion for plants might warn us which blossoms will charm and which will kill. The word kill landed softly, almost playfully, yet the table changed around it. Not enough for a stranger to hear, enough for Ottilie to feel it. Sibella tapped her fan against her wrist. Alpheus, how dramatic you are, though I suppose some flowers do carry a sinister reputation. Foxglove, for example, beautiful, but not safe in careless hands. Sir Barnabas's eyes moved toward Ottilie's pocket. My daughter's hands are more often ink-stained than careless. The table laughed, as it was expected to do. Not loudly. That would have been vulgar. They laughed in the trained, silken way of people making agreement sound like amusement. Ottilie felt each sound settle on the faded blue muslin. She could have remained silent. Silence had kept her housed, fed, and technically unmarred for years. But there are insults that pass over dignity, and there are insults that test whether dignity is alive. She raised her eyes. Foxglove is dangerous when misunderstood, she said. So are most things. Sabella tilted her head. How learned. I confess I prefer flowers that require no warning label. Then you prefer not to know what is in your own garden. Sir Barnabas set down his glass. Ottilie. The warning in her name was unmistakable. Ivo's gaze found hers across the table. He did not shake his head. He did not encourage her to perform. He simply waited, as if her next sentence belonged to her and no one else. That waiting steadied something she had not known was trembling. Ottilie turned back to Sabella. A plant is not vulgar because a fashionable person cannot name it. The silence came at once. It did not crash. It opened. Footmen moved with trained faces behind the chairs. Alpheus's smile thinned. Sabella's fingers tightened over her fan. Sir Barnabas looked as if he had found a crack in fine china, just as guests were lifting it to the light. Then Ivo spoke, not to rescue her from what she had said, but to make the room answer it. An excellent distinction, Lady Ottilie. If I may ask, what would you plant near a breakfast conservatory in April, if beauty were not the only requirement? For a moment, she could not speak. The question was a door opened where a wall had always been. She had expected contradiction. She had expected her father to correct her manners and Sabella to smooth the insult into comedy. She had not expected the Duke of Haverston to place her knowledge at the center of the table, as if it had a right to sit there. I would avoid anything too heavily scented near food, she said slowly. Hyacinths can be oppressive in a warm room. Rosemary is cleaner. Violets are mild if not overdone. Harebells would be too delicate for display, but they remind the eye to look closely. And Foxglove? Alpheus asked. Not near a breakfast table, Ottilie answered. Not because it is wicked. Plants are not wicked, but because people are careless, and careless people often blame what they failed to understand. Ivo's expression changed so slightly that only someone already watching him would have seen it. Approval, perhaps, or recognition. Not admiration in the empty way men admired a gown. Something quieter. It passed between them like a held note. Ottilie felt it and looked away first. Romance had no place at her father's table, yet her pulse had not been informed. Sir Barnabas gave a stiff laugh. You see, Your Grace, what I endure. Most fathers must worry that their daughters read too many novels. I must worry mine will poison conversation with shrubbery. On the contrary, Ivo said, I find the conversation improved. You are kind to say so. I am not especially kind. The Duke took a sip of wine and set the glass down with exact care. I am accurate when possible. Sabella's fan fluttered. How fortunate Lady Ottilie has found a defender. Ottilie looked up sharply. Defender. The word was sweetened with poison. If accepted, it made her weak. If denied, it made her ungrateful. Before Ivo could speak, she answered for herself. His Grace asked a question. I answered it. That is not defense, Lady Sabella. It is conversation. This time, no one laughed. Ivo did not smile either, but his eyes held hers across the candlelight with a steadiness that made her feel both seen and summoned, not summoned toward him. Toward herself, that was far more dangerous. The fish course arrived, and conversation was redirected with visible effort. Sir Barnabas praised Sabella's accomplishments. Sabella spoke of patronesses, subscriptions, and a planned display of spring flowers arranged to symbolize charity. Alpheus returned to his wine and watched Ottilie's pocket whenever he thought no one saw. She noticed. So did the Duke. Ottilie could tell by the way his attention shifted without his head moving. It was a remarkable skill, that stillness. A lesser man would have stared. Ivo observed. When the second remove was set down, Sabella leaned toward Ottilie with a smile fit for embroidery. "You must promise to advise me next week, Lady Ottilie. I should hate to place something dangerous where it might distress his grace." "Advice is useful only when wanted." "Oh, but I do want it." "Then I advise labels." Sabella blinked. "Labels? They prevent confusion." Alpheus gave a soft laugh. "And what a tragedy confusion would be." Ivo's knife paused, only for an instant. Ottilie felt the moment gather and store itself somewhere beyond the reach of ordinary conversation. She did not yet know why Alpheus's amusement troubled her, or why Sabella's mention of Foxglove had felt less like ignorance than rehearsal. She only knew that the faded blue dress, the harebell in her pocket, and the Duke's quiet attention had shifted something in the house. Her father had meant to shame her into silence. Instead, he had placed her where Ivo Marset could hear her. The meal ended with preserved pears and a sweetness no one seemed able to taste. When the ladies rose to withdraw, Sir Barnabas's voice stopped Ottilie at the door. "My dear, try not to instruct the drawing-room on deadly flowers while the gentlemen are absent." Sabella smiled into her fan. Ottilie looked at her father, then at the Duke, who had risen with the rest and stood very still beside his chair. She could feel the old obedience waiting to reclaim her. She could also feel something new, small and blue and stubborn as a harebell. "I shall not instruct anyone who does not ask," she said. "But if someone mistakes danger for decoration, I may find silence difficult." The words hung over the table. Ivo's eyes held hers once more. There was no touch, no promise, no impropriety at all. Only the unmistakable sense that, for the first time in years, someone powerful had not asked her to become less. As Ottilie followed the ladies from the dining room, Alpheus Crane turned his wineglass slowly between his fingers and murmured to his sister, too softly for the room, but not softly enough for Ivo to miss. "Then we must be careful what we ask her." The ladies withdrew beneath a politeness so polished it reflected nothing true. Ottilie walked behind Lady Sabella Crane and two visiting cousins of her father's, who had spoken little at dinner but had smiled whenever Sir Barnabas did. The drawing-room received them with lamps newly lit, a tray of ratafia set out, and chairs arranged as if conversation were an embroidered pattern one might spoil by sitting honestly. Sabella took the place nearest the fire without appearing to claim it. She had the gift of possession disguised as accident. Ottilie accepted a chair beside a small table, where no one had placed a lamp bright enough for needlework, much less for reading. Her faded blue skirt pooled around her with a stubborn softness. She felt the harebell card in her pocket, and the weight of Ivo Marset's words moving quietly through her mind. A weed is merely a plant judged by the wrong company. She should not have held the sentence so close. Men of rank often said elegant things because rooms rewarded them for it. Yet he had not spoken like a man seeking applause. He had spoken like someone correcting a label. That made it harder to dismiss. Sabella poured herself a little ratafia and did not offer the decanter first to the eldest lady present, a small breach made graceful by confidence. "Lady Ottilie," she said, "you were most illuminating at dinner." I had not realized one could make an entire conversation out of hedgerow growth. One cousin laughed behind her glove. Ottilie looked at the unlit table beside her, where the silver edge of a tray held a reflection of her sleeve. I had not realized one could make an entire character out of disliking it. The laugh stopped. Sabella's eyes brightened, not with amusement, but with interest. A woman who could be provoked was easier to aim. "My dear, I don't dislike knowledge. I only dislike seeing it wasted where charm would do better." Then we differ. Charm has been asked to do too much work in this world already. Sibella's fan opened slowly. Across the room, the door to the dining room remained closed, but Ottilie imagined the gentleman inside, over port, her father warning the Duke against indulgence. Alpheus laughing, that soft laugh. Ivo listening with that unnerving stillness. She did not know what he would make of her in the privacy of masculine judgment. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps the memory of the library would fade now that dinner had dressed it in family embarrassment. The thought hurt more than it ought. She rose before it could show. "Pray excuse me. I left my handkerchief in the passage." It was not true, but it was plausible. No one stopped a lady in search of linen. In the corridor, the air was cooler and dimmer, carrying the distant smell of wax, roast meat, and rain beginning somewhere beyond the closed shutters. Nancy stood near the sideboard with a folded stack of napkins, exactly where a maid could be useful without being noticed. Her face changed when she saw Ottilie. "Are you unwell, miss?" "No, only briefly tired of being improved by society." Nancy's mouth pressed tight against a smile. "The gentlemen have not come through yet. Then I am safe for one more minute." Ottilie drew the harebell card from her pocket to reassure herself it had not bent. The pressed flower lay intact. Blue faded to a soft ghost of itself. Her thumb hovered near the edge, not touching. She had nearly slipped it back when a door opened at the far end of the corridor. Ivo Marset stepped out alone. He saw her at once and stopped as if stillness were a courtesy he had mastered long ago. Behind him, the dining room door closed with a low click, shutting away the muted rumble of men's voices. Nancy took one swift step into view, becoming chaperone by instinct rather than instruction. Ottilie could have loved her for that alone. The Duke noticed Nancy too, and his expression acknowledged the propriety of her presence before he addressed Ottilie. "Lady Ottilie, forgive me. I did not intend to startle you." "You did not." A small lie. He glanced at the card in her hand. "I am relieved to see the harebell survived dinner. Pressed flowers are accustomed to being flattened." A grim recommendation, an accurate one. He came no nearer than the width of the corridor allowed, and even that distance felt charged because he respected it. No gentleman had ever made space feel like safety before. He nodded toward the card. "May I return what I failed to say earlier?" "You returned the card." "Not that." He looked at the faded flower, then at her face. "I remembered the correction at Morrow's. I did not know the hand that made it. For 3 years I kept thinking the unknown O.L. had done what half the men who publish learned volumes will not do. Write small in the margins. Observe carefully before speaking." The words went through her defenses with embarrassing ease. Ottilie looked down. "You make a virtue of a habit my father has long considered inconvenient. Your father and I appear to disagree on several useful matters. He would call that unfortunate. I'm not persuaded misfortune belongs to the side he thinks." A faint warmth rose in her chest, and with it came fear. Warmth was treacherous in cold houses. It tempted one to remove armor too early. She folded the harebell card between her fingers. "Careful not to damage it." "You should not praise me too openly, Your Grace. In this house, praise often becomes something for others to correct." Ivo's face altered. Not dramatically. He was not a dramatic man, but something in him sharpened, as if her sentence had entered a ledger he meant to balance. "Then I shall be precise rather than lavish. Your observation at dinner was sound. Foxglove should not be placed near a breakfast table. Nor should ignorance be allowed to arrange what knowledge must later repair." Ottilie looked at him then, truly looked. "You heard, mister. Crane. Yes, and Lady Sabella. Yes, they were teasing, were they? The quiet question unsettled her more than agreement would have done. In the drawing room, Sabella had made Foxglove sound like a fashionable jest. At dinner, Alpheus had used danger lightly, as if testing whether the word would float. Ottilie had heard it. Ivo had heard it too. I don't know, she admitted. Perhaps I am too used to being made ridiculous. One begins to suspect shadows of having opinions. Ridicule is often a useful curtain. People hide ugly intentions behind it because laughter makes witnesses lazy. The corridor seemed to narrow around that sentence. Nancy shifted beside the sideboard, not intruding, but listening enough to be living proof that the meeting was innocent. Ottilie slid the harebell card back into her pocket. My mother used to say something similar, though less severe. She said a plant's common name tells you what people fear or love about it. She taught you botany. She left books. The teaching had to continue without her. For the first time, Ivo's expression softened without losing control. I am sorry. She had heard those words many times, usually from women who meant, how inconvenient that your mother died before she could finish making you marriageable. Ivo did not sound like that. He sounded as if he understood that a death could leave unfinished conversations scattered through a life. Ottilie's throat tightened. She drew plants better than anyone I have seen. And you, I copy badly. I doubt that. You have not seen the drawings. No, I have seen the way you look at what others fail to name. Her fingers curled once in the fabric of her skirt. The blue muslin was suddenly not a disgrace, but a witness. It had brought her into this corridor as herself. She made herself answer lightly, because anything else would reveal too much. You place alarming trust in evidence gathered from one dinner and one old library mistake. Not trust. Interest. That may be worse. It often is. This time, she nearly smiled. So did he. The moment was small, contained, and impossible to explain to anyone who had not spent years being spoken over. Then the dining room door opened again behind him. Male voices approached. Ivo stepped back at once, increasing the distance before propriety could be questioned. Sir Barnabas emerged first, followed by Alpheus Crane. Her father saw Ottilie, saw the Duke, saw Nancy's visible presence, and still managed to look displeased that scandal had not been easier. Ottilie, he said, I trust you have not detained His Grace with more field notes. Before she could reply, Ivo said, On the contrary, Sir Barnabas, I detained Lady Ottilie to ask whether the charity breakfast invitation included her name. I had not seen it on Lady Sabella's list. Sabella had come to the drawing-room threshold in time to hear. The fan in her hand paused. Sir Barnabas's smile hardened. An oversight, I am sure. I dislike oversights when they exclude the only person at dinner who knew what should not be placed near a breakfast table. Ivo's tone remained pleasant. That made resistance awkward. I shall send a corrected card tomorrow. Sabella lowered her lashes. How thoughtful, Your Grace. Lady Ottilie must be delighted. Ottilie felt the trap of delight. Too much gratitude would make her ridiculous. Too little would make her rude. She curtsied slightly. I am obliged by the correction. Ivo looked at her, and in that instant she understood he had done more than invite her. He had forced the room to admit she had been omitted. A small restoration, a dangerous one. Alpheus's gaze moved to her pocket again. Then we shall all benefit from Lady Ottilie's warnings. Only if someone intends to ignore them, she replied. The words came out calm. Even she was surprised. Ivo's eyes held hers for one steady breath, and the corridor, with its waxlight and watching faces, became a place where she did not feel alone. Then Sabella smiled, soft as cream poured over poison. "How fortunate," she said, "that we shall have an expert among us." As the party moved back into the drawing room, Ottilie saw Alpheus lean toward his sister. She could not hear his words this time. She saw only Sabella's glance toward the pocket where the harebell card rested, and the faint, calculating curve of her mouth. Somewhere below stairs, a door opened to the service passage. A footman in crane livery slipped out through the kitchen gate with a folded packet tucked beneath his coat. By noon the next day, every polished surface in Lydgate House seemed to know that the Duke of Haverston had corrected an invitation. The calling card arrived in a cream envelope thick enough to silence objection. Sir Barnabas read it in the breakfast room, with a face that changed by degrees. First from satisfaction to surprise, then from surprise to the kind of rage that remembered there were servants present. Ottilie sat at the far end of the table with a slice of toast cooling untouched on her plate. She had slept badly. The previous evening had left her mind too crowded for rest. Ivo Marset's voice had followed her into the dark, not as a declaration, not even as a promise, but as an exactness she had never been given before. The only person at dinner who knew what should not be placed near a breakfast table. It was foolish that such a sentence could warm her. It was more foolish that she had repeated it to herself while the house settled, while carriage wheels faded in the street, while Nancy folded the blue dress over a chair as gently as if it had returned from battle. Sir Barnabas lowered the card. "His Grace has included you." Ottilie looked up. That was his stated intention. "Do not be pert. I was being factual. Facts are often pert when you hold them." He tossed the card onto the table. It slid across the linen and stopped beside the marmalade dish. Lady Ottilie Lydgate, written in a clear formal hand below Lady Sabella Crane's name and above the hour of arrival. Her name looked almost strange there, not tucked into an afterthought, not implied by family attendance. Named, restored. Across the table, Sir Barnabas's jaw tightened. "You will attend because refusal would be discourteous to His Grace. You will behave because any further display of eccentricity will be discourteous to me." "I understand. I doubt that." He reached for his coffee, then stopped when Nancy entered with fresh toast. A small smear of soot marked one cuff of her apron, likely from the kitchen range. Sir Barnabas's eyes found it as if soot were a moral failing. "Your maid carried that card in from the hall, did she not?" Ottilie's attention sharpened. "I believe Mr. Larkin brought it in, sir." "It reached your tray." Nancy stilled. The toast trembled slightly on its plate. "I placed it where Mr. Larkin told me, Sir Barnabas. And perhaps you read it on the way." Ottilie set down her knife. Nancy did not correct the invitation. Her father turned his head slowly. "Did I ask you?" "No, that is why I answered before the question became an accusation." The silence after that was not long, but it was expensive. Sir Barnabas looked at Nancy, then at Ottilie. He understood the exchange exactly. So did Nancy, whose eyes had lowered, but whose face had gone pale with gratitude and fear. "You grow bold," Sir Barnabas said. "No," Ottilie replied, "only tired of watching harmless people pay for other people's discomfort." His fingers closed over the coffee cup. For a moment, she thought he might smash it down. He did not. Lydgate House could not afford the sound of broken porcelain before noon. "Leave us," he told Nancy. Nancy curtsied and went. Ottilie watched her go, glad at least that no notice had been given, no wages cut in the space between toast and temper. When the door closed, her father leaned back. "You mistake His Grace's curiosity for admiration." "Do I?" Men of his rank are amused by oddities. They do not marry them. Lady Sabella understands that distinction. You would do well to observe her. I have observed her. Then learn. He pushed the cream card toward her with 2 fingers. You will wear something suitable. Lady Sabella has shown unusual kindness in offering to send over a gown she thinks might flatter you. I have accepted. Ottilie felt the old pressure gathering, the soft social machinery by which women were altered until they could be praised for disappearing. That was generous of her. It was necessary of her. I shall thank her and decline. Sir Barnabas stared. You shall not. You have that faded rag. It is clean. It is an embarrassment. To whom? He rose so abruptly that the chair legs scraped the floor. Do not take that tone with me in my own house. Ottilie stood as well, because remaining seated made her feel like a child waiting to be dismissed. Her heart beat hard, but her voice stayed level. I will attend the breakfast in my own dress. If His Grace invited me because of what I know, then dressing me as Lady Sabella's copy would be a poor repayment. You imagine yourself principled. You are merely difficult. Perhaps, but I am not available to be costumed by someone who laughs at me. That struck. She saw it in his face. Not because he cared that Sabella had been cruel, but because Ottilie had named cruelty without asking permission. He took the invitation back, folded it once, and placed it on the mantel with dangerous care. Then let the Duke admire your honesty, if he is foolish enough. But remember this, Ottilie, a gentleman may enjoy an odd conversation. Society enjoys a spectacle more. 2 days later, the blue dress was cleaned, pressed, and laid out again. Nancy had worked over it with a devotion that made Ottilie's throat ache. The cuffs were neater. The hem, though worn, no longer betrayed the places where city dust had gathered. It would never be fashionable. That was its defense. Ottilie was fastening the last hook when a note arrived from Lady Sabella, written on paper scented faintly of orange blossom. My dear Lady Ottilie, I shall not insist upon the gown, though I confess I had hoped to see you in something less severe. We must all be allowed our little symbols. Yours appears to be plainness. Mine, I hope, shall be charity. Until tomorrow. S.C. Nancy read the note over Ottilie's shoulder and made a face before remembering herself. Begging your pardon, miss. Do not beg it. Your face was accurate. She means to make you look stubborn. I am stubborn. Not like that. Ottilie folded the note. No, not like that. She placed it in the drawer. Not because it mattered, but because she had learned that careless scraps of paper often became useful to people who meant harm. Downstairs, the household was restless with preparations for the next morning's outing. Sir Barnabas had ordered the carriage inspected. A footman had been sent twice to confirm the hour. Lady Sabella's maid had called with a small box of ribbons that Ottilie returned unopened. Nothing seemed extraordinary, and yet Ottilie could not forget the Crane footman slipping through the kitchen gate with a folded packet beneath his coat. She had not seen his face clearly enough to accuse anyone. She did not even know what he carried. But the memory held the same shape as Alpheus Crane's laughter when he said confusion would be a tragedy. That evening at Bell and Rook Apothecaries, near Piccadilly. Mr. Alpheus Crane removed his gloves before signing the ledger. He did so with the ease of a man who preferred not to leave smudges where smudges might be remembered. The apprentice behind the counter was young, freckled, and eager to please anyone wearing good boots. For your gardener, sir? For a rat problem in an outbuilding, Alpheus said. A preparation only. Nothing dramatic. My sister has a terror of pests near the conservatory flowers. The apprentice hesitated. Foxglove must be handled with care. So must gossip, and yet London survives it daily. Alfea smiled and placed coins on the counter. Wrap it well. The packet was folded in brown paper and sealed with the apothecary's printed label. Alfs glanced once at the entry as the apprentice wrote A. Crane in a narrow hand. Then he slipped the packet into a book of pressed flowers he had brought for precisely that purpose. Outside, his sister waited in the carriage, her pale gloves resting on her floral fan. "Well?" Sabella asked as he climbed in. "Obtained. And if anyone asks, no one asks the right questions until after the wrong answer has travelled." Sabella looked toward the darkening street. The Duke looked at her as if she mattered. "Then we must teach the room to look at her differently." Her fingers tightened around the fan, just enough to bend one painted flower at its stem. "Not ruined," she said, "only made unsuitable. There is often little difference." The next morning dawned bright, washed clean by overnight rain. Ottilie stood in the entrance hall while Sir Barnabas inspected her as if she were a misdelivered parcel. The faded blue dress fell plainly from shoulder to hem. Her hair was smooth. Her gloves were mended but spotless. In her pocket rested the harebell card, wrapped now in a thin sheet of paper for safety. Sir Barnabas said nothing about it, which meant his anger had moved beyond words into calculation. Lady Sabella arrived in her own carriage to accompany them, dressed in soft green with a bonnet lined in cream. She kissed the air near Ottilie's cheek. "My dear, you are very faithful to your symbols, and you to yours." Sabella's smile held. "How clever." "No, only observant." As servants moved around the carriage, Sabella's maid stepped close under the pretense of adjusting a rug. She carried a small brush used for cleaning silk slippers, its bristles faintly tinted blue. Ottilie turned because Sir Barnabas had called her name, and in that brief, ordinary movement, the maid brushed lightly along the lower hem of the blue muslin, a dusting so fine no one would notice unless told to look. Ottilie felt only the faintest tug at the fabric. She glanced down. Nothing seemed changed. Sabella was already stepping into the carriage, her expression serene. "Come, Lady Ottilie," she called. "We mustn't keep His Grace waiting." Ottilie placed one hand on the carriage frame and climbed, in with the harebell safe, in her pocket, the unknown blue dust clinging to her hem, and the uneasy conviction that the breakfast ahead had been arranged for more than flowers. The carriage rolled through a London washed bright by the previous night's rain, its wheels hissing over damp stones, as though the city itself were whispering warnings. Ottilie sat opposite Lady Sabella Crane, with Sir Barnabas beside the window, and Sabella's maid perched outside near the footman, where no one within could see her face. The faded blue dress lay smooth over Ottilie's knees, plain as ever, its hem brushing the carriage floor. She had checked the pocket twice without seeming to, and the harebell card remained safe beneath its thin paper wrapping. Nothing else felt safe. Sabella had been pleasant for nearly a quarter of an hour, which was more alarming than open malice. She spoke of patronesses, subscriptions, hothouse blooms, and the Duke of Haverston's rumoured interest in improving the education of gardeners on great estates. Each sentence was harmless by itself. Together they formed a net. "You must be pleased, Lady Ottilie," Sabella said, glancing at the blue muslin. "It is not every day that a gentleman of His Grace's consequence takes notice of a lady's little hobby." "No," Ottilie replied, "nor is it every day that a hobby proves more accurate than a dinner table." Sir Barnabas made a sound of warning. Sabella smiled as if she had been complimented. Accuracy is admirable when softened. Most useful things are ruined by softening. The carriage slowed before a walled garden attached to a gracious town house hired for the charity breakfast, its glass conservatory catching, the pale sun like a promise too polished to trust. Already carriages lined the street. Footmen in varied liveries stood near the gate. Ladies in spring silks moved beneath parasols, and gentlemen lingered in clusters, all pretending charity had drawn them when curiosity had done at least half the work. Ottilie stepped down after Sabella and felt, for a moment, the cool kiss of air against her hem. She looked down. The dress seemed unchanged. She did not see the faint dusting of blue along the lower edge, no more noticeable than pollen brushed from a path. She only felt watched. Inside the garden gate, the scent of damp earth met the heavier sweetness of forced blooms. Tables had been arranged along the gravel walk with china cups, seed catalogues, subscription sheets, and little cards bearing names of plants in a fashionable hand. The conservatory doors stood open. Heat breathed from within, carrying green smells of leaf, moss, and watered soil. Ottilie's pulse steadied despite herself. Here, at least, plants had names whether society approved of them or not. Then the whispers began. Not loud, never loud. London rarely needed volume when a glance could wound cleanly. That is Sir Barnabas's daughter, in blue muslin. How singular, perhaps it is deliberate. One hears his grace admires cleverness. Sir Barnabas heard enough to stiffen. "Stand straight," he murmured, "and do not answer unless addressed. Then perhaps no one should address me. Ottilie." She looked ahead, and there was Ivo Marset. He stood near a table of labelled specimens, dark coat immaculate, one hand resting lightly behind his back as he listened to an older patroness speak of subscriptions. He turned before anyone announced. Ottilie. He saw her. He saw the dress again. This time, in daylight, before half a dozen ladies waiting for him to choose where attention should fall. His face did not alter with surprise. That alone felt like shelter. He bowed first to Sir Barnabas, then to Sabella, then to Ottilie with the same exact courtesy, but his gaze lingered on her only, long enough to say without speaking that the dress had not disappointed him. "Lady Ottilie," he said, "I am glad you came." Sabella's smile brightened. "We could hardly resist your Grace's corrected invitation, a necessary correction." He turned toward a tray of small potted specimens. "In fact, I hoped Lady Ottilie might prevent another." Sir Barnabas's expression tightened. "Another, Your Grace? This label." Ivo lifted a small card from beside a potted plant with delicate pale blossoms. "It has been placed beneath the wrong specimen. At least, I believe so. I would value a second opinion." Every conversation within several yards softened at the edges. Ottilie felt the listening begin. The old instinct rose. Make yourself smaller. Do not display. Do not correct. Then she saw Sabella watching, the painted flowers on her fan folded like closed eyes. She saw Alpheus Crane beyond her, laughing with a gentleman near the cordial table, his attention too casual. She stepped closer to the specimen. "May I?" "Please." Ivo gave her the card, holding it by one edge. Their fingers did not touch this time. He was careful. She was grateful, though a foolish part of her missed the accident from the night before. She read the label, examined the leaf shape, then looked at the next pot in the row. This card belongs there. The leaves are opposite, not alternate. Someone has confused them because the flowers are similar from a distance. A distance can be a dangerous place from which to judge, Ivo said. A few ladies exchanged looks. One elderly patroness leaned forward with sudden interest. "Is the distinction important, Lady Ottilie?" Sir Barnabas inhaled, but he could not silence a question asked by a woman of standing. Ottilie folded her hands loosely before her. Sometimes very important. In this instance, merely embarrassing. In others, a mistaken leaf may change a remedy into a harm. How dramatic, Sabella said lightly. One begins to fear breakfast. One need not fear breakfast, Ottilie replied. Only carelessness near it. Ivo's eyes met hers. Not amusement alone now. Approval, yes, but also warning. He had heard the echo from dinner. Foxglove, dangerous plants, careless hands. Before he could speak, Sabella took charge of the room with practiced grace. Then let us have cordial before Lady Ottilie frightens away the subscriptions. Laughter rose, relieved to be allowed. Footmen began moving among the guests with glasses of cordial, pale gold in the morning light. Alpheus stood near the table where the drinks had been arranged. Ottilie saw him lift one glass, hesitate, and set it nearer the front of the tray as Sabella approached with a rustle of green silk. It was an ordinary movement. It meant nothing unless one was already troubled by him. Yet Ottilie's attention caught on it. Ivo accepted a glass from Sabella. "Your Grace," she said, lowering her lashes, "you must drink to the success of charity." "With pleasure." He lifted it. Ottilie was near enough to catch the scent as he moved the glass. Sugar, citrus, something bitter beneath, so faint it might have been peel left too long in the bowl. Her mind reached for a name and failed. Ivo drank. Not much. A polite mouthful. Sabella watched the glass lower. Alpheus looked away too quickly. Ottilie opened her mouth, then closed it. She had only a scent. No proof. No right to cry danger in a crowded garden because unease had sharpened her imagination. "Lady Ottilie," Ivo said, as if he had sensed her hesitation. "Will you walk with me to the conservatory path? There is another specimen I have been told I mislabeled, and I fear my pride requires correction in private before the committee discovers it." It was properly phrased and publicly heard. Sir Barnabas could not object. Sabella could not follow without appearing eager. Ottilie inclined her head. "If I can be useful." "You have already been that." They walked with several guests drifting within sight, enough distance for conversation, enough witnesses for propriety. The conservatory path curved beneath glass panes beaded with rain. Ferns crowded the edges. A damp stone step interrupted the gravel, slick where water had gathered. Ivo reached it first, then turned. He offered his hand, palm open, not assuming. "May I?" The question was simple. The effect was not. Ottilie looked at his gloved hand and felt how many times she had been guided, placed, corrected, and moved without being asked. This was different because refusal had room to exist. She placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, brief, and careful as she stepped over the damp stone. No pressure, no claim. Only assistance freely offered and freely accepted. The warmth of it moved through her with embarrassing force. She released him once her foot found the gravel, and he let her go at once. "Thank you," she said. "I would rather not see your father blame the stone." The laugh escaped her before she could prevent it. Small, startled, real. Ivo looked pleased by it, not triumphant. "There," he said softly. "That is the first sound today no one arranged." She looked away toward the fern glass because her face had warmed. "You make dangerous observations, Your Grace. Only when invited by evidence. And what evidence invited that one? You did not laugh once last night unless someone was spared by it." The words struck gently, which made them worse. Ottilie had no answer. Beyond the path, Sabella's voice rose in bright conversation. Alpheus moved near the cordial table again. Ivo lifted his glass, as if remembering he had not finished it. The bitter scent drifted up once more, clearer in the moist conservatory air. Ottilie's unease returned. "Your Grace," she began. He looked at her. But before she could shape a warning from so little, he blinked and placed one hand against the iron rail. The color had shifted in his face, not dramatically, but enough. His shoulders remained straight. His mouth tightened, the glass tipped slightly in his hand. "Are you unwell?" she asked. "It is nothing." But his voice had lost its evenness. He gripped the greenhouse rail harder. And in that instant, Ottilie saw Sabella watching from beyond the open conservatory door, her smile fixed and waiting. Ottilie moved before anyone else understood there was danger. The Duke of Haverston's fingers had tightened around the iron rail, his glass tipping just enough for one amber drop of cordial to slide down the stem. His face remained composed by force of breeding and will, but the color beneath his skin had changed to a faint, alarming gray. "Your Grace," she said, low and clear, "give me the glass." "It is nothing," he answered, but the words were too measured. A man said such things when he was negotiating with his own body. "Please." That made him look at her. Not the command, because she had given none. The plea. He placed the cordial glass carefully into her hand, as if even unsteadiness must observe manners. Ottilie held it by the base, away from the rim, and bent just enough to smell without touching. Sugar, citrus, bitter herb beneath. The name came nearer this time, rising from old pages, from her mother's inked notes, from drawings of leaves with toothed edges and bells like purple fingers. Foxglove, not the plant itself perhaps, not crudely crushed leaf floating for all to see, but something prepared, strained, made quiet enough to hide under sweetness. Her pulse struck hard. She did not have proof. She had symptoms, scent, and a room waiting to misunderstand her. "Do not drink more," she said. "I had no intention of making a habit of fainting in public." His attempt at dryness might have reassured another woman. Ottilie heard the strain beneath it. She turned toward the nearest footman. "Set that side table here. Do not touch the rim of this glass. Do not let anyone remove it." The footman stared. Footmen were not accustomed to obeying unmarried daughters in old blue dresses. Ivo lifted his head. His voice came quieter than usual, but carried. "Do as Lady Ottilie says." The footman moved at once. That was when the party noticed. Conversations along the gravel path faltered. A patroness turned. Sabella stepped into the conservatory doorway, one hand pressed to her bodice, her expression arranged between concern and readiness. Alpheus Crane came behind her with the look of a man arriving at a scene he had rehearsed, but wished to appear surprised by. Sir Barnabas pushed through two ladies and stopped when he saw the Duke gripping the rail. "Your Grace? Good God! What has happened?" "His Grace is unwell," Ottilie said. "The cordial must be preserved." Sabella's eyes went to the glass, then to Ottilie's face. "Preserved? What a strange word to choose." "It is the correct word." "Is it?" Sabella's voice rose just enough to invite listeners. "Lady Ottilie, you sound almost as if you expected something to be wrong with it." The silence sharpened. Ottilie felt the trap opening under her feet. "I noticed a bitter scent before His Grace drank." "Before," Alpheus repeated. How remarkably attentive. Ivo straightened, though the effort cost him. "Lady Ottilie warned me after noticing the scent." "Did she?" Sabella looked down, and Ottilie followed the direction of her gaze too late. The lower hem of the faded blue dress bore a faint dusting of powdery blue, visible now where damp from the conservatory path had darkened the muslin behind it. "How curious," Sabella whispered. "What is that on your gown?" Ottilie looked. For a moment, understanding refused to form. She had walked from the carriage, through the garden, over the damp stone. She had not knelt among flowers. She had not brushed against any blue-powdered plant. The mark did not belong there. I do not know. You don't know Sabella's concern became sorrow with terrifying ease. But you brought specimens, did you not? Everyone saw them last night. Everyone heard you speak of Foxglove. Sir Barnabas turned on Ottilie with a look she knew too well. Not fear for the Duke, fear of embarrassment attaching to himself. What have you done? Nothing. Then why is your dress marked? Because someone marked it. The sentence left her before caution could stop it. Alpheus laughed softly. Someone? That is a wide accusation for a lady with plant dust on her hem. A murmur moved through the conservatory. Ladies shifted away from Ottilie as if knowledge were contagious. The footman placed the side table near the rail, and Ottilie set the cordial glass upon it. Her hand shook once. She hated that. Sabella saw it. There is more, Sabella said, turning with sudden delicacy toward a chair near the path. Alpheus, what is that beside Lady Ottilie's seat? He bent before anyone could stop him and lifted a pressed leaf from the gravel near the chair where Ottilie had sat earlier, long, veined, unmistakable to anyone who had seen as illustrated herbal, foxglove. The sound that passed through the guests was small but brutal. Sir Barnabas went red, then pale. Ottilie. Her name was no longer warning. It was verdict. Ottilie stared at the pressed leaf in Alpheus's fingers. That is not mine. But surely you recognize it, Sabella said. You spoke so, confidently at dinner. Recognition is not possession. No one said it was. You implied it. My dear, don't make this worse. The sweetness of that sentence struck more cruelly than accusation. My dear. As if Sabella had found her wounded and wished to cover her with lace before showing the room. Ottilie drew a breath. She could feel the harebell card in her pocket, innocent and fragile, now made suspicious by association. She could feel the blue dust on her hem becoming evidence in minds that wanted a simple story. Plain woman, learned woman, dangerous woman. Apologize, Sir Barnabas said under his breath. Say you were careless. Say you carried the thing unknowingly. Say anything that will end this. Ottilie turned to him. The old obedience rose, exhausted and familiar. It promised survival. It promised Nancy's wages, a roof, fewer scenes. It promised the small safety of self-betrayal. Then Ivo moved. He released the rail and extended one hand toward the table, palm downward, steadying himself. Not to command her, not to claim her, simply to remain standing beside the truth as long as his body allowed. No one, he said, voice thin but distinct, will remove that glass. Alpheus's expression tightened. Your Grace, surely your health is more urgent than a glass. My health is precisely why it stays. Sabella's eyes hardened for half a second. Ottilie saw it, and so did Ivo. He looked at her then, not Sabella. His hand shifted, palm open now, offered across the small distance between them. Not hidden, not possessive, not rescuing her from speech, only a question in the shape of a hand. You are not alone. Ottilie placed her gloved fingers on his for one brief public moment. His hand was cooler than it should have been. She felt his weakness, and beneath it his will. The contact steadied her more than any defense could have done. Then she released him and stepped forward. If I wished to harm a man, she said, her voice carrying farther than she expected, I would not begin by naming the plant before witnesses. No one answered. Even Sabella waited. Ottilie turned to the footman. Who served his Grace this glass? The young man flushed. It came from the tray, my lady. Who placed it on the tray? He looked toward the table, then toward Alpheus, then quickly down. I do not know. Then who stood nearest the tray before Lady Sabella offered it? Ottilie Sir Barnabas snapped. Enough. No, Ivo said. One word. It did not thunder. It did not need to. Sir Barnabas's mouth closed. Ottilie faced the guests again. The cordial has a bitter scent. The glass must be kept. The leaf must be kept. The dust on my hem must be examined before anyone brushes it away. If I am to be accused, then let the accusation be clean enough to stand without help from panic. A patroness near the doorway murmured. Very properly said. Sabella's fan trembled. Alpheus closed his fingers around the pressed leaf, as if he had forgotten it should not be handled. Ottilie saw the mistake and pointed. And that leaf should not be in Mr. Crane's bare hand if it is meant to prove anything. A second silence fell, sharper than the first. Alpheus looked down at his own fingers. I picked it up to prevent alarm. You created alarm by displaying it. Ivo's mouth tightened, not quite a smile. Not now. Place it on the table, Mr. Crane. Alpheus obeyed because refusing a duke before witnesses required a courage he did not possess. As he set the leaf down, Sabella moved, and the painted floral fan in her hand dipped toward her skirts. Ottilie's eye caught a sliver of brown paper stuck beneath one rib of the fan, almost hidden where the painted blossoms overlapped. A torn label. Small black print, bell and rook, perhaps. Or she imagined it, because fear had taught her to see patterns. No. She had seen the Crane footman leave by the kitchen gate with a folded packet. She had smelled bitterness in the glass. She had watched Alpheus place one glass forward. A thread, a leaf, a label, a lie. They were not yet proof. They were direction. Lady Ottilie must leave, Sir Barnabas said. She is overwrought. I am not overwrought. You are making a spectacle. She turned to him fully. No, sir, I am refusing to become one quietly. The words reached the edge of the garden. A few ladies lowered their eyes. Others did not. Ivo, still pale, took one careful breath. Lady Ottilie warned me first. That fact will be remembered. Sabella looked between them, and for the first time that morning, she appeared less certain of the room. Ottilie kept her hands still, though her heart hammered. She had not cleared her name. She had not saved the Duke. Not yet. But the glass remained on the table. The leaf lay beside it. The blue dust still marked her hem, and beneath Sabella's fan, the torn apothecary label waited like a secret that had made one mistake too many. The scandal did not end when the guests withdrew from the conservatories. It travelled. It moved from mouth to fan, from gravel path to carriage step, from the preserved cordial glass to every face that had watched Lady Ottilie Lydgate stand in a faded blue dress with blue dust on her hem and a foxglove leaf on the table beside her. By the time Sir Barnabas forced her into the carriage, the story had already begun arranging itself into the shape London preferred. A duke had nearly fallen ill. A plain, clever lady had spoken too knowingly of dangerous plants. A pressed leaf had been found near her chair. Her gown had been marked. That was enough for most people. London did not require truth when suspicion was better dressed. Ottilie sat rigidly opposite her father, with Nancy beside her and the preserved dignity of silence around them like thin glass. Sabella and Alpheus had returned in their own carriage, pleading concern for his grace with expressions so tender that Ottilie wanted to ask whether they practiced before mirrors. She did not. The cordial glass had remained behind under the Duke's explicit order, placed in the care of a Haverston servant, and watched by two committee ladies who had suddenly discovered an interest in evidence. The foxglove leaf had been folded into clean paper by the same servant, after Alpheus removed his hand from it. The blue dust remained on Ottilie's hem, faint and damning. No one brushed it away. She would not allow it. "You have disgraced me," Sir Barnabas said, as the carriage turned from the garden wall into the damp London street. "No," Ottilie replied. "Someone attempted to disgrace me. There is a distinction. Do not split words while a duke is unwell. I am trying to preserve the truth of why he is unwell." His face darkened. "You are trying to make yourself important." Nancy's hands tightened in her lap. Ottilie saw it and kept her voice even. "If importance were my aim, I would have chosen a better dress." Sir Barnabas leaned forward. "You will say nothing more. You will return home. You will remain in your room until I decide whether this can be mended." "Mended into what? An explanation. Or a lie. A survivable explanation," he snapped. "You will say you carried the leaf unknowingly. You will say your little studies made you careless. You will say you meant no harm and ask forgiveness." Ottilie looked out at the passing street, where ladies with clean hems stepped over puddles as if the city had been made to inconvenience them politely. Her heart still beat too fast, but beneath its fear lived a clearer thing. "I will not apologize for a plant I did not bring, a powder I did not place, or a cordial I did not pour." Sir Barnabas's mouth thinned. "Then you may find yourself with fewer defenders than you imagine." The word defenders struck her because it had followed her since Sabella had first shaped it at dinner. Defender, protector, rescue, all the words that could turn a woman from witness into burden. When the carriage stopped at Lydgate House, Ottilie stepped down without taking her father's offered hand. She had not meant the refusal to be visible, but he saw it. So did Nancy. So did a groom at the door who lowered his eyes quickly. In the entrance hall, Sir Barnabas ordered tea, as if tea could restore social structure. Ottilie had taken only 3 steps toward the stairs when the knocker sounded. Everyone froze. The butler opened the door, and a Haverston footman stood there, followed by an older lady in deep violet silk and a black lace cap, whose posture carried enough authority to silence curiosity before it formed. Behind her, pale but upright, stood Ivo Marset. Ottilie's breath caught despite every effort of will. He should have been resting. He looked as if he had spent the journey forcing his body to obey rank. His color had improved, but not fully. His eyes, however, were entirely clear. The older lady stepped forward. "Lady Haverston Dowager," the footman announced. Sir Barnabas bowed at once. "Madam, Your Grace, this is an unexpected honor." "Expected, perhaps," Lady Haverston said. "Honor depends upon what is said next." Ottilie liked her immediately. Ivo's gaze found Ottilie's hem, then her face. "Lady Ottilie, forgive the intrusion. I would not have come if the matter were less urgent." "Your Grace should be resting," she said before she could stop herself. His mouth softened at the edge. "I have been told the same thing by 3 people. I disliked it each time." Lady Haverston looked at him. "You disliked being correctable. That is not the same." In another life, Ottilie might have smiled. In this one, Sir Barnabas was already arranging his features into paternal distress. "My daughter is overwrought, Your Grace. I was about to insist she withdraw until the confusion can be resolved." "She is not overwrought," Ivo said. "She was the only person present who behaved as though confusion could be resolved." The entrance hall went very still. Sir Barnabas lowered his voice. Surely this conversation would be better conducted without servants. "Servants saw enough this morning to matter," Lady Haverston replied. Pretending they did not would be inefficient. Ivo drew a breath, controlled and shallow. Ottilie saw the effort and hated that he had spent strength on this house. "Lady Ottilie," he said, "my aunt has offered Haverston House as a place where you may be safe from gossip while we inquire into the cordial." Sir Barnabas brightened in immediate calculation. Nancy looked relieved. Lady Haverston watched Ottilie with interest rather than expectation. Ivo continued carefully, as if each word had been chosen on the journey. "You would have my aunt's protection, a proper household, and no one would be permitted to trouble you until I have found who tampered with the glass." It was a generous offer, a powerful offer, a dangerous offer. Ottilie felt how easy it would be to accept. To be carried out of her father's anger, to let the Duke's name stand like a wall between herself and London, to rest, for 1 hour, beneath someone else's authority and call it safety. Then she saw the shape of it as others would. Lady Ottilie removed from sight. Lady Ottilie hidden in the Duke's house. Lady Ottilie too compromised by suspicion to remain in her father's. Lady Ottilie protected because she could not answer for herself. Her chest tightened. No. Sir Barnabas turned. "Ottilie." Ivo went still. "No." She lifted her chin, though her throat had gone dry. "I am grateful for the intention, Your Grace. But no, you would be safe. I would be absent. Only until the inquiry. Absence will become guilt by supper." The words came faster now, because fear had burned away the part of her that softened truth for comfort. "If I enter Haverston House under your protection today, every person who saw that blue dust on my dress will say I was hidden because I could not be cleared. They will say you sheltered me out of pity or fascination or guilt. They will say I trapped you into defending me. They will not say I was innocent." Ivo's face changed, not with anger, worse, with recognition. "I did not intend to make you seem owned, but you did not ask whether I would." Silence followed. It was not the cutting silence of judgment. It was the silence of a man struck honestly. Sir Barnabas made an impatient sound. "This is absurd. A lady in your position does not refuse ducal protection." Ottilie did not look at him. "A lady in my position has been placed too often by other people." Lady Haverston's eyes sharpened, but she did not interrupt. Ivo looked at Ottilie as he had in the corridor, as if her words were not an inconvenience, but evidence. "You are right," he said. Sir Barnabas blinked. "Your Grace?" Ivo ignored him. "You are right. I saw danger and reached for the nearest wall I could build. I did not consider that a wall may still be a prison if one has not been asked to enter it." The apology was not theatrical. It did not kneel. It stood before her plainly, and that made it harder to bear. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know too well how to command. I am trying to learn how to ask." Ottilie felt the words settle into a place her father had never touched. Because he had never thought to look there, no man in that house had apologized to her without turning the apology into a debt. Ivo did not. He waited. "What do you want, Lady Ottilie?" he asked. Her answer had been forming since the conservatory, from glass, leaf, dust, and the torn paper beneath Sabella's fan. "I want the label." His brows drew together. The label? There was a torn apothecary label caught beneath Lady Sabella's fan. "I saw only part of it. Bell and Rook, I think. Near Piccadilly." Ivo's expression sharpened. "You are certain?" "No. I am certain enough to ask the question." Sir Barnabas stepped forward. "You will do no such thing. You will not drag respectable people into trade shops because of a scrap you imagined while hysterical." Ivo turned his head. "Sir Barnabas." The softness of the address was perilous. "If you use that word for Lady Ottilie again in my hearing, you will find this conversation much less comfortable." For once, her father had no answer. Ottilie should not have warmed at the protection. She did, but it was different now. Ivo had defended her after asking what she wanted, not instead of asking. That mattered. She looked at Lady Haverston. "Would your ladyship be willing to accompany us? If we go to an apothecary, propriety will need more strength than my reputation currently possesses." Lady Haverston's mouth curved. "My dear, propriety has been waiting all morning to be put to better use." Ivo looked at Ottilie, and though his face was still pale, his eyes had regained their steadiness. "Then we begin there. Not as your ward," she said. "No," he gave the slightest bow, "as my witness." Ottilie turned toward the stairs, not to retreat, but to fetch her gloves, preserve the marked hem, and wrap the harebell card more securely in her pocket. At her back, her father said her name once, low and furious. She did not stop. For the first time in her life, leaving the room did not feel like defeat. It felt like choosing the door. The journey to Bell and Rook apothecaries took place under the protection of propriety so complete that no gossip-monger could easily improve upon it. Lady Haverston Dowager sat beside Ottilie in the Duke's carriage, with the air of a woman who had spent 70 years making scandal lose its nerve. Nancy faced them, hands folded tightly around Ottilie's spare gloves, while Ivo rode opposite, pale but steadier than he had been in the Lydgate entrance hall. He had not argued when Lady Haverston insisted he take the backward-facing seat and keep the window lowered for air. He had only endured the order with the expression of a man discovering that affection and command were sometimes delivered in the same voice. Ottilie watched him without seeming to. The angle of his shoulders remained precise. His gloves were immaculate. Yet when the carriage jolted over a rough patch near Piccadilly, his fingers pressed once against his knee before relaxing. The cordial had not left him untouched. That knowledge tightened something inside her, not with panic now, but with purpose. The glass had been preserved by his servant. The foxglove leaf had been wrapped. The blue dust still marked the lower hem of her dress, guarded beneath a plain travelling cloak. The harebell card remained in her pocket, safe and innocent, though she had begun to understand that innocence did not protect anything until someone proved it aloud. Lady Haverston looked from one to the other and said, "No one will raise voices in the shop. Raised voices are for people without documents." Ivo inclined his head. "Aunt, I never raise my voice." "No, you merely lower it until people fear for their futures." Ottilie almost smiled. The expression escaped only in the smallest curve, but Ivo saw it. He looked pleased in that quiet way of his, then turned his attention to the street. "Bell and Rook is not a fashionable chemist," he said. "It serves households, gardeners, and physicians' men. If Crane purchased something there, he expected privacy rather than prestige." "Or speed," Ottilie said. The footman left the kitchen gate soon after dinner. If a packet was wanted for the breakfast, there was little time to arrange it. "You saw the footman?" "Only enough to know he wore Crane livery and carried a folded packet beneath his coat." Lady Haverston's eyes sharpened. "That is not little, my dear. That is a thread." Threads break only when pulled foolishly. The carriage drew up before a narrow shop with dark green paint, brass lettering, and 2 cloudy jars. In the window, filled with colored liquids that seemed less medicinal than theatrical. Inside, shelves rose to the ceiling, crowded with bottles, packets, drawers, folded papers, and scales. The air held sharp notes of camphor, dried mint, vinegar, and something bitter that made Ottilie think again of Ivo's glass. An elderly apothecary emerged from behind the counter, followed by a freckled apprentice, whose eyes widened when he recognized a duke, a dowager, and an accused lady in one breath. "Your Grace," the apothecary said, bowing so quickly he nearly struck the counter. "Lady Haverston, How may we serve? Ivo did not step forward. He looked at Ottilie. The choice was deliberate, visible, and more intimate than any gallantry could have been. He was placing the first question in her hands. Ottilie drew the torn image from memory rather than from possession. The actual label fragment remained with the evidence from the conservatory, but she had seen enough of its border and print beneath Sabella's fan to ask. A packet may have been purchased here within the last 2 days, she said. Brown paper, printed shop label, possibly foxglove preparation. The apprentice went pale. The apothecary's mouth tightened. Foxglove is not dispensed carelessly, my lady. Then your ledger will be careful too. Ivo's gaze flickered toward her, swift and warm. The apothecary hesitated until Lady Haverston set her reticule on the counter with a small, decisive sound. Mr. Bell, I have known your late mother since before you learned to spell tincture. Bring the ledger. That settled it. The ledger appeared, bound in cracked brown leather, its pages ruled and dated. Ottilie did not touch it at once. She asked for the entry from the previous evening. The apprentice turned pages with fingers that had begun to tremble. There it was, written in a narrow, upright hand. A. Crane, foxglove preparation, paid in coin, collected at 7 o'clock. For rat problem in outbuilding. Ottilie read the words once, then again, not because they were difficult, but because proof had a strange quietness when it first arrived. Who purchased it? Ivo asked. His voice was calm, but the shop seemed to shrink around it. The apprentice swallowed. A gentleman, your grace, tall, fair, fine coat. He gave the name Crane. Mr. Alpheus Crane? Ottilie asked. The boy looked miserable. I couldn't swear to the Christian name, my lady. He signed A. Crane. Did he bring anything with him? The boy blinked. A book. What sort of book? Pressed flowers, I think. He opened it to put the packet inside, so it wouldn't show. Lady Haverston murmured, How delicately wicked. The apothecary gave her a wounded look. My lady, had we suspected improper use? Then we shall give you the opportunity to be useful now, Ivo said. My solicitor will require a copy of that entry and the apprentice's account. The word solicitor made the apprentice look as if he might bolt into the storeroom. Ottilie saw fear sharpen in him, familiar and ugly. Young men in trade could be crushed by gentlemen who knew which debts to press and which reputations to stain. She had no wish to save herself by frightening someone less protected than she was. No one is accusing you of malice, she said to him, but a man who used your shop may try to make you forget him. The apprentice looked at her then, truly looked, as if he had expected the lady in the plain dress to be either hysterical or grand. She was neither. He told me not to gossip, he whispered. He said households don't like apprentices who repeat purchases. That was not advice, Ottilie said. That was practice for a threat. Ivo turned to the apothecary. Your apprentice will not suffer for telling the truth. My man of business will call within the hour. If Mr. Crane or any person connected to him returns, you will send word to Haverston House. Yes, your grace. Ottilie looked again at the ledger. Alpheus had purchased the preparation. That mattered. It did not yet prove he had placed it in the cordial. A purchase could be explained away. A rat problem. A gardener's instruction. A sister's conservatory concern. London's lies were often strongest when they borrowed practical clothing. This is not enough, she said. Ivo looked at her. No. You agree? I am learning not to mistake the first useful fact for the final truth. The sentence was gentle, and yet it returned them to the entrance hall, to his apology, to the wall he had almost built around her. She felt the echo of it in her hands. The room had grown close with the smell of bitter herbs and fear. Her fingers trembled once against the edge of the counter. She hated that he noticed. She loved, dangerously, that he did not pretend not to. "Lady Ottilie," he said softly, with Lady Haverston and Nancy both plainly present. "May I?" He did not move until she understood. Her hand lay gloved on the counter, not far from his. He was asking to steady, not seize, to comfort, not claim. Ottilie should have refused, because the world was watching, but the world had watched her be accused and called it propriety. She turned her palm upward. Ivo rested his hand lightly over hers, only for a moment. Enough for warmth, enough for courage, enough to say without rescue that she was not standing alone among shelves of poison and paper. "Thank you," she said. "Always by permission," he replied. Her throat tightened. Then she withdrew, and he let her go at once. The apprentice, perhaps moved by what he had just seen, or perhaps frightened into honesty at last, cleared his throat. "There was one more thing, my lady." Ottilie turned back. "Yes?" The gentleman asked whether powder from a harmless flower would cling to muslin if brushed on dry. I thought it an odd question. He laughed when I asked why. Nancy made a small sound. Ottilie looked at her. The maid's face had gone pale with recognition. "Miss," Nancy whispered, "Lady Sabella's maid had a brush. Before we left yesterday, it was blue at the bristles. The shop seemed to hold its breath." Ottilie thought of the faint tug at her hem beside the carriage, Sabella calling brightly. "We mustn't keep his grace waiting." Blue dust. A planted leaf, a bitter cordial, a torn label beneath a fan. The story was no longer smoke, it had shape. Ivo's face had gone very still. "We need the maid." "No," Ottilie said. "We need the order of the glasses first. Then the maid. If we confront one piece before the others are fixed, they will scatter." Lady Haverston smiled slowly. "My dear, remind me never to play whist against you." Ottilie looked down at the faded blue hem beneath her cloak, marked by another woman's brush and another man's plan. For the first time since the conservatory, she did not feel stained by it. She felt instructed. "We return to the conservatory," she said. "And this time we begin with where everyone stood." The conservatory looked different when Ottilie returned to it by choice. The morning before, it had glittered with patronesses, cordial glasses, pale gloves, and the soft violence of people deciding what to believe. Now the garden had been cleared of guests, and the glass roof held only the grey afternoon light. Rainwater still clung in bright beads along the iron ribs. The air smelled of damp soil, crushed fern, and the faint sourness of spilled cordial that had seeped into the wood of the side table despite the servants' careful wiping. The table itself remained where the Duke of Haverston had ordered it placed. The cordial glass was gone, already secured by his servant, and watched at Haverston House until his solicitor could take charge of it. But the absence of the glass seemed to mark the space more strongly than its presence had. Lady Haverston Dowager stood near the open door, with Nancy beside her, both plainly visible to any gardener, servant, or committee member who might pass. Propriety had been brought along like a chaperone with teeth. Ivo Marset stood at the edge of the path, still pale enough that Ottilie disliked the distance he had travelled. Though he had said nothing of fatigue since they left Bell and Rook apothecaries, he had offered no instructions in the carriage, no plan disguised as concern, no ducal certainty laid over her thoughts like a cloak. He had only asked, as they passed through the garden gate, "Where would you begin?" It had steadied her more than any promise. Now she stood beside the cordial table in the same faded blue dress, its hem still marked by the planted dust. She had refused to change. The dress had been made part of the accusation, and therefore the dress would remain part of the answer. Sabella stood here, she said, touching the air above the place where the cordial tray had rested, not the table itself. She spoke of charity and offered his grace a glass. Mr. Crane was there, near the end of the table. He lifted one glass, set it nearer the front, and moved away when she approached. Ivo's eyes followed each point she indicated. I remember taking the glass from Lady Sabella's hand, and I remember the scent when you lifted it. Bitter, yes, but hidden under sugar and citrus. Lady Haverston's voice came from the door, a cordial made sweet enough to make caution seem rude. Ottilie looked at the path, rebuilding the morning in some silence. The patronesses here, Sir Barnabas near the subscription sheet, Sabella's maid behind the cluster of ladies. Alpheus close enough to change a glass. The chair near the path where the pressed foxglove leaf had later been discovered. Not discovered, displayed. That distinction mattered. The leaf was not meant to poison anyone, Ottilie said. It was meant to tell the room what story to believe. Ivo's expression hardened. That you had brought Foxglove. That I was odd enough, learned enough, and unfeminine enough to make harm plausible. The words came without bitterness. That surprised her. Perhaps bitterness required uncertainty, and she was past that now. The blue dust served the same purposes. It made the dress look connected to plants. It made my pocket, my card, my knowledge, all seem part of one design. Nancy made a small sound. Miss, I should have seen her do it. Ottilie turned at once. No, you saw enough. You remembered the brush. That matters. Nancy's eyes filled, but she nodded. Lady Haverston looked toward the service passage. And the brush? Likely returned to the maid's workbox, Ivo said, unless they have already destroyed it. Ottilie shook her head slowly. Sabella will not destroy what she can still use. If she intends to suggest the dust came from flowers I carried, the brush may be needed to spread more. Then we must secure it quietly. He looked toward a waiting Haverston servant at the gate and gave the order with a glance more than a word. The servant left. Ottilie noted it. Authority, used cleanly, did not always feel like control. Sometimes it was only a door opened before evidence vanished. She moved to the chair where the pressed foxglove leaf had been found. Its cushion had been removed, but the gravel beside it showed the faint disruption of many shoes. This is too obvious, she said. A woman who knows Foxglove would not drop a pressed leaf beside her own chair after warning a duke about his cordial. Unless she wished to be caught, Lady Haverston said dryly. And I have never yet met a woman who wished to be caught in old muslin. Ivo looked at Ottilie then, and the gravity in his face warmed, not with amusement only, but with something that recognized the cruelty beneath, the joke. What do you need next? The question opened more space than the conservatory could hold. Ottilie drew a breath. A table at the Chelsea Physic Garden Patronage Day, the cordial glass, the apothecary ledger, the torn label if we can obtain it, the pollen brush, the servant who saw where everyone stood, and the greenhouse visitor register from this morning. Ivo's brows drew together. The register, there was a side passage into the service area. If Mr. Crane or Sabella's maid entered it before the cordial was poured, someone may have signed or been noted by the garden staff. Deliveries, water, tools, visitors. Gardens remember people through ledgers when drawing rooms pretend not to. Lady Haverston gave a low, approving hum. Excellent, we shall ask for it. Not loudly, Ottilie said. If they know we need it, they will take it. The Duke turned back to her. Then we ask as if it is a matter of subscriptions, not accusation. Yes, she hesitated, but the truth must be public eventually, not whispered into a private settlement, not corrected by your title alone. I understand. Do you? The question came sharper than she intended. Ivo accepted it without flinching. I am trying to. She looked at him across the damp path. His face was drawn from the effects of the cordial, but his attention remained entirely hers, not consuming, not demanding gratitude, waiting, again waiting. If you speak first, she said, they will say I was saved by rank. If you produce the evidence, they will say I was fortunate in a powerful admirer. If you declare me innocent before I show why, they will believe you are generous, not that I am truthful. Then you will speak first, and if I falter, then I will still not take your voice from you. The answer was immediate, quiet, exact. It struck her harder than praise. She had been holding herself rigid for so long that she had not noticed the effort until something in her loosened. The conservatory blurred for one humiliating second. She turned away, but Ivo did not pretend not to see. He also did not step toward her as if comfort were a right. Ottilie, he said, and it was the first time he had used her name without title, softly, carefully, as though asking permission from the syllables themselves. She looked back. Tell me where to stand. No man had ever asked her that. They had told her where to stand all her life, beside the screen, behind the brighter girl, near the door, out of the way, in a gown not of her choosing, in silence. In gratitude, now a duke stood before her in a damp conservatory, pale from a poison meant to ruin her, and asked where his strength would do the least harm. The distance between them closed, because moved, not because he did. She stepped forward before fear could teach her manners again. Ivo remained still until she reached him. Only then did he lift his arms slightly, not enclosing, not claiming, simply making space. Ottilie leaned into him. The embrace lasted only a few breaths. Lady Haverston and Nancy stood in plain view. The conservatory door remained open. Nothing about it could be called improper by anyone who did not prefer cruelty to comfort. Yet to Ottilie it felt more intimate than any whispered compliment could have been. His hand settled gently at her back, light enough that she could step away at any moment. She did not. For those few breaths, she allowed herself to be held by someone who had asked where to stand. There, she whispered, against the fine wool of his coat. Stand there. Beside you, where I can see you, not in front. Then that is where I will be. She stepped back first, and he let her go at once. Her face was warm, but her hands were steady now. Lady Haverston looked out toward the garden with the deliberate attention of a woman granting privacy by refusing to notice what was perfectly evident. Nancy wiped one eye with the back of her glove and pretended it was dust. A Haverston servant returned at a brisk walk, his expression tight. Your Grace, the maid's brush has been found in a workbox. There is blue powder in the bristles, but the greenhouse register is not in the service room. Ottilie's steadiness sharpened into something harder. Who asked for it last? One of Lady Sabella's people, the undergardener says. Not an hour ago. Ivo's gaze moved to Ottilie. This time he did not ask if she was certain. He already knew. Lady Haverston closed her reticule with a decisive snap. Then tomorrow will be lively. Ottilie looked down at the blue dust on her hem, then toward the empty place where the cordial glass had stood. They had tried to make her dress speak shame. They had tried to make her knowledge speak guilt. Now they were stealing ledgers because truth had begun to find grammar. Let them hide it, she said. A missing register is also an answer. Ivo stood beside her, not before her, as the rain began tapping softly on the glass roof above them. Then we shall make them hear it. The next morning at Chelsea Physic Garden, every path seemed to lead toward judgment. The gravel had been raked smooth before the guests arrived. The glass houses washed until they caught the early sun in hard, bright sheets, and the long demonstration table stood beneath an awning near the physic beds with enough space around it for patronesses, gentlemen, servants, and suspicion. Ottilie saw all of it from the carriage window before Sir Barnabas helped himself down and left her to follow. As if a daughter in a marked gown were an inconvenience better handled by footmen, she did not wait for assistance. She stepped onto the gravel in the same faded blue muslin, the lower hem guarded from careless brushing by Nancy's watchful eye, and a clean overskirt pinned up just enough to keep the stain visible without spreading it. The blue dust remained faint but legible. Her gloves were fresh. Her hair was plain. In her pocket, wrapped carefully in paper, the harebell card rested against her palm whenever she needed to touch certainty. Across the garden, Lady Sabella Crane stood beside a cluster of patronesses in lavender silk, smiling with the serene patience of a woman who believed the morning had already been won. Alpheus Crane lingered near the service passage, his expression mild, his coat perfect, his eyes restless. Sir Barnabas saw them and turned on Ottilie before anyone could greet her. "Last chance," he said under his breath. "Withdraw this foolish demonstration. His Grace may forgive your confusion. Society will not forgive your pride." Ottilie looked toward the demonstration table. It held the preserved cordial glass under a small cover, a paper packet containing the pressed foxglove leaf, the apothecary ledger copy secured from bell and rook, and a small cloth-wrapped object that Evo's servant had placed there at dawn. The pollen brush, the torn label from Sabella's fan, had not yet been obtained openly. But Ottilie had seen enough. It is not pride to refuse a false confession. "You will have no home if this fails." The sentence was meant to break quietly inside her. It did not. Perhaps because she had expected it. Perhaps because terror, when used too often, lost some of its imagination. "Then I had better not fail." Sir Barnabas's face hardened, but Lady Haverston Dowager arrived before he could answer, dressed in black silk with a violet shawl and carrying her cane as if it were a legal instrument. "Sir Barnabas, how kind of you to stand aside. Lady Ottilie and I must speak." He bowed because refusing her would have been social suicide. When he retreated, Lady Haverston took Ottilie's measure from bonnet to hem. "You look very steady." "I'm not." "Good. Only fools are steady before public stupidity." Nancy, standing just behind Ottilie, gave a nervous breath that might have been a laugh if fear had not caught it first. Ivo approached from the direction of the glasshouse, walking more slow than usual, but without visible weakness. His color had returned, though careful eyes could still see the faint restraint in his movements. He had dressed not for display, but for authority. Dark coat, pale waistcoat, no unnecessary ornament. He looked at the table, at the guests, then at Ottilie. "The register is gone," he said. She had expected the words. They struck anyway. From the service room. From the service room, the steward's shelf, and the garden clerk's desk. All three places were searched. The under-gardener remembers seeing it yesterday. This morning, nothing. Sabella's smile seemed to brighten across the path, as though distance could not hide triumph. Ottilie felt the ground shift beneath her, not outwardly, but in the private place where courage keeps its ledgers. The register had been the cleanest proof of movement through the service passage. Without it, the story could still be twisted. Alpheus could deny. Sabella could sigh. A maid could vanish behind another household's protection. Then they knew it mattered, Ottilie said. Ivo's eyes remained on hers. Yes, that helps. It does not help enough. No, she did not soften the truth. He seemed to value that. Lady Haverston looked toward Nancy. Child, you have been pale since we arrived. Speak before you faint and become inconvenient. Nancy startled. My lady? Ottilie turned. Nancy's fingers were pressed around something hidden in her apron pocket. Her eyes flicked toward Alpheus, then toward the service passage. I didn't know whether it was important enough. What is it? Ottilie asked gently. Nancy drew out a folded sheet, creased twice and smoothed many times. When I carried water to the conservatory yesterday morning, the garden clerk asked me to take a note back through the service passage. He had the register open. I saw the names because Mr. Crane was making a jest about not liking to sign Blow a coal merchant. Later, when everything happened, I wrote what I remembered before sleep could spoil it. She held out the paper. It isn't the register. It's only my copy. The Ottilie took it was Nancy's, painstaking and slightly uneven, but the order was clear. Water delivery, florist's crate, Mr. A. Crane, maid attached to Lady Sabella Crane. Tray service requested, committee linen. Times approximated by the kitchen clock. Not enough alone, but not nothing, never nothing. Nancy, Ottilie said, this may matter a great deal. The maid's eyes filled. I should have said sooner. You said before I stood at the table. That is soon enough. Alpheus had seen the paper. He came toward them at once, smiling too quickly. What touching industry. Has Lady Ottilie's maid taken up evidence now? Ivo stepped half a pace forward, then stopped. Ottilie saw the restraint and understood it as a promise kept. He would not stand in front of her, not unless she asked. Alpheus bowed toward Lady Haverston. Forgive me, my lady. One grows curious when servants begin producing papers at public events. Nancy flinched. Ottilie felt the movement like a wound. Servants have eyes, Mr. Crane. It is one reason guilty people prefer them frightened. His smile cooled, a bold claim from a lady who has not yet cleared her own hem. Then do not interrupt me while I do so. A few nearby guests turned. Sabella's gaze sharpened across the garden. Alpheus lowered his voice. A maid's copy proves nothing. She could have written it this morning for money, loyalty, or instruction. Nancy went white. Ivo spoke then, calm enough to make every word dangerous. Mr. Crane, you will not accuse a servant in my hearing without evidence. Your Grace, surely I may question. You may wait. The command landed softly and stayed. Ivo turned to the solicitor standing near the table, a grave man with iron-grey hair. Mr. Hailwick, you saw when this copy was placed in your possession? The solicitor bowed. I see it now, Your Grace, in the presence of Lady Haverston, Lady Ottilie, Mr. Crane, and several witnesses. I shall mark the time and take a signed statement from the maid before the demonstration concludes. Alpheus's mouth tightened. How very formal. Lady Haverston tapped her cane once against the gravel. Truth becomes formal when liars become busy. Ottilie nearly smiled, but the garden had begun to gather around them. Patronesses drifted nearer under parasols. Garden staff hovered at the edge of duty. Sir Barnabas stood near Sabella, now his face caught between dread and anger. Sabella watched Nancy with an expression so cold that Ottilie understood the maid was in danger of being made the next sacrifice if the morning failed. She folded Nancy's copy and placed it beside the ledger on the table. Then she felt Ivo beside her, not touching, simply near. Lady Ottilie, he said quietly, before you begin, She looked down. His hand was offered, palm open, close enough to take, low enough that it would not become spectacle unless she made it one. Not a rescue, a question. The memory of the damp conservatory rose between them. "Tell me where to stand." She placed her gloved hand in his. This time she did not take it for one brief instant only. She held on. Several breaths passed. The garden sounds thinned. Gravel under shoes, the soft clink of glass, Sabella's fan opening, Nancy's unsteady inhale, Lady Haverston's cane settling against the table leg. Ivo's hand was warm, steady, and still. He did not squeeze to command courage into her. He let her find it. "I'm frightened," she said, barely above a whisper. "I know. If I cannot make them hear me, then I will still have heard you." Her eyes lifted to his. It was not enough for justice. It was not proof, but it was something no one in her father's house had ever given her without price. She let the warmth remain 1 second longer, then released him herself. He let her go. Sabella's smile had vanished. Ottilie stepped to the demonstration table and removed the cover from the cordial glass. The preserved residue caught the light at the bottom like a small amber lye. She set the foxglove leaf beside it, then the blue-stained brush, then the ledger copy, then Nancy's folded page. Around her, the garden held its breath. Sir Barnabas muttered her name as a warning one final time. She did not turn. Lady Haverston stood behind her. Ivo stood where she could see him, not before her. Nancy stood with both hands clasped, and her chin lifted despite Alpheus's glare. Ottilie looked at the patronesses, the gardeners, the gentlemen, the servants, the woman who had smiled at her ruin, and the father who had preferred obedience to truth. "Let us begin," she said, her voice clear enough to cross the gravel, with the cordial. The cordial glass stood at the center of the table like a small court of law. Ottilie did not touch it at first. She let the witnesses look. Patronesses leaned forward beneath their bonnets. Gardeners gathered at a respectful distance. Gentlemen, who had come to be seen charitable, now found themselves required to be useful. Sabella stood very still near the lavender border, her fan open across her bodice. Alpheus had placed himself half behind her, where a man might appear supportive while preserving an avenue of escape. Sir Barnabas watched Ottilie with the rigid fury of a father who had discovered too late that silence, once broken, could not be folded back into a daughter's mouth. Ivo stood where she had asked him to stand. To her, left and slightly behind, within sight, but not in command. That mattered more than any declaration he could have made. Ottilie drew a clean paper from the table and laid it beside the glass. "His Grace drank from this vessel yesterday morning," she said. Shortly afterward, he suffered pallor, dizziness, and weakness. "I do not claim to be a physician. I claim only to know enough of plants to recognize when a symptom and a scent should not be dismissed, because dismissal is convenient." A murmur moved through the listeners. She lifted the glass by its base and angled it toward the light. There remains a bitter residue beneath the cordial. It was hidden under sugar and citrus. Foxglove, when prepared carelessly or maliciously, may be concealed from the eye more easily than from the nose. Alpheus laughed once. A remarkable performance. Does Lady Ottilie now diagnose poison by scent for public amusement? "No," Ottilie said. "I name caution before evidence, and evidence before accusation. That is the order others forgot yesterday." Lady Haverston's cane struck the gravel softly, not as interruption, but punctuation. Ottilie set the glass down and lifted the pressed foxglove leaf in its folded paper. "This leaf was found near my chair after His Grace became unwell." Mr. Crane lifted it bare-handed before anyone else could examine it. Alpheus's colour changed. I acted from alarm. You acted before any alarm required handling the one object that conveniently pointed to me. She looked toward the gardeners. A pressed leaf does not fall from a lady's pocket without creasing other papers, catching on cloth, or being noticed when she sits. It was placed where it could be found. Sibella's voice floated in, wounded and musical. Lady Ottilie, you cannot prove such cruelty merely because you dislike the conclusion. No, Ottilie said, that is why I brought the rest. She took up the small packet containing the blue dust brushed from her hem. This powder was found on my gown. It was meant to suggest that I had carried or handled dangerous plants. But the dust is blue, light, and flower-like. Foxglove preparation is not this. Harebell pollen and blue decorative dust cling differently than medicinal residue. A person who wished only to create suspicion might not understand that. She lifted the cloth from the recovered brush. Its bristles still held a faint blue stain. A little shock passed through the assembly. Nancy's breath caught behind her. Sibella's fan shifted, just enough for Ottilie to see the painted flowers tremble. This brush, Ottilie continued, was found in a maid's workbox after Nancy, my maid, remembered seeing Lady Sibella's maid carry it before we left for the breakfast. I did not kneel among blue flowers. I did not powder my own hem. The mark was put there to make my worst dress testify against me. A servant's memory, Alpheus said sharply. A maid's loyalty. Ivo moved half a step, then stopped. Ottilie felt his restraint and took strength from it. She looked directly at Alpheus. Servants remember what their betters trust them not to notice. Several faces changed at that, not all kindly. Enough. She placed Nancy's copied delivery page beside the brush. Nancy carried water through the service passage yesterday morning. She saw the garden register open and copied the names she remembered that night, before she knew the original would vanish. Her list places Mr. Alpheus Crane and Lady Sibella's maid in that passage before the cordial was served. Alpheus spread his hands. A copy produced by a frightened maid. Convenient. Very convenient, Lady Haverston said, especially since the original register disappeared shortly after Lady Ottilie asked for it. At the edge of the crowd, a garden underservant hurried toward Mr. Halerwick, Ivo's solicitor, carrying a metal ash basket with both hands. The solicitor bent, examined the contents, and drew out a partly singed page with tongs wrapped in cloth. His expression did not change, but the air around the table did. "Your Grace," he said, "the missing register, or part of it, has been found in the furnace basket behind the forcing house, not burned beyond reading." Sibella went white under her careful colour. Alpheus took one step backward. Ottilie held herself still as Mr. Halerwick brought the page forward. The edges were blackened, the middle browned by heat, but several entries survived. A. Crane, maid to Lady S. Crane, service passage. Tray requested. The words were ugly in their plainness. "Read it aloud," Ivo said. Mr. Halerwick did. No one laughed now. No one whispered. Even Sir Barnabas seemed to have aged 10 years in a single minute. Ottilie took the apothecary ledger copy from Bell and Rook and placed it beside the singed page. This ledger records a purchase of foxglove preparation under the initials A. Crane, the evening before his Grace was made ill. The apprentice remembered the purchaser carrying a book of pressed flowers. He also remembered a question about whether blue powder would cling to muslin. Alpheus's face twisted. "You have no right to drag my name through trade ledgers before ladies. You dragged mine through poison before witnesses." The sentence struck the garden harder than any raised voice. Sabella closed her fan. "Alpheus," she whispered, but her whisper carried because everyone was listening. It was not affection in her voice. It was warning. Ottilie turned to her. "Yesterday I saw a torn apothecary label caught beneath your fan. Bell and Rook. I could not take it from you then. Perhaps you will show it now." Sabella lifted her chin. "I don't know what you mean." "Then open your fan. This is insulting." "Yes," Ottilie said. "False accusation often becomes insulting when returned to its owner." Lady Haverston extended one gloved hand. "Lady Sabella, if the fan is innocent, it will survive inspection." Sabella looked toward Sir Barnabas. He looked away. That abandonment, small and cowardly, broke something in her composure. Her fingers fumbled. The fan opened. Beneath one painted blossom, pressed into a loosened rib, clung a torn fragment of brown paper with part of Bell and Rook's printed border. A collective breath moved through the garden. Sabella stared at the fragment as if it had betrayed her of its own will. Ottilie's voice softened, which somehow made the question crueler. "Why did you fear a woman in an old dress?" Sabella's eyes flashed wet and furious. "Because he looked at you," she said. "He looked at you as if the dress did not matter, as if all the things we are taught to polish could be set aside because you knew the name of a weed. So you tried to make knowledge seem dangerous. I tried to make him see sense." "No," Ivo said, speaking fully now for the first time since Ottilie began. "You tried to make me doubt the woman who saved me from finishing that glass." He turned toward the gathered witnesses. "House of Marset will withdraw all patronage from any event or household that receives Lady Sabella Crane or Mr. Alpheus Crane as if this morning had not occurred. Mr. Heilowick will pursue the matter of the tampered cordial and the destruction of the register. I will not receive slanderers. I will not protect cowards who use a lady's learning as a noose." Sir Barnabas flinched as if the word coward had found him by title. Ottilie faced her father. "You asked me to confess to carelessness." His mouth worked, but no defense came. "You preferred a survivable lie to an inconvenient daughter." Around them, the judgment of society shifted with a sound softer than applause and far more lasting. Women who had whispered over her hem now looked at the dress differently. Gardeners looked at Nancy with respect. The patroness who had approved Ottilie's questions the day before stepped forward and said clearly, "Lady Ottilie, the committee would be honored to receive your recommendations for the plant labels before printing." Sabella made a small broken sound. Alpheus said nothing. Sir Barnabas stared at the gravel. Ottilie felt no triumph. Triumph was too loud for the quiet place inside her where relief had begun. After the witnesses withdrew into clusters, and Mr. Heilowick gathered the evidence, Ivo approached her in the open glasshouse doorway, where no shadow could make the moment improper. He held out the harebell card she had given him for safekeeping while she arranged the table. "This was the first truth of you I ever held." She took it, her fingers steady now. "It was only a flower." "It was never only that." He looked at her as if the garden, the scandal, and the watching world had receded without disappearing. "May I kiss you, Ottilie?" Her heart gave one clear, astonishing answer before her voice found it. "Yes." She stepped closer so no one could mistake consent for surrender. His kiss was gentle, brief, and reverent, a promise kept within the bounds of daylight and an open door. When he drew back, his eyes were unguarded at last. "I love you." The words entered her like warmth after a long winter, not rescuing her, not owning her, simply naming what had grown in truth. Ottilie held the harebell card between them and smiled through tears she no longer needed to hide. "I love you, Ivo, Not because you saved me, but because you let me stand. 2 months later, the faded blue muslin dress hung behind glass at Haverston House, and no one who saw it dared call it ugly. The small herbarium room had once been a neglected breakfast parlour overlooking the east garden, a pale, narrow chamber where unfashionable chairs had gone to die beneath Holland covers. Ivo had changed almost nothing of its shape. He had only ordered the walls washed, the shelves fitted with shallow drawers for specimens, and the morning light left unhindered by heavy curtains. The result was not grand. It was better than grand. It was exact. Ottilie stood in the doorway before the guests arrived, still holding her gloves, and looked at the room as if it might vanish if admired too openly. Her drawings had been framed at eye level, not tucked above doors as polite decoration, not laid flat in albums where someone could praise the binding and ignore the work. Harebell, rosemary, violet, fern, and one careful study of foxglove, rendered with such severe honesty that no one could mistake beauty for innocence again. Beneath each drawing, in a small clear hand, was written Lady Ottilie Lydgate, not O.L., not an anonymous correction in a margin. Her name, her whole name. Near the central case, the blue dress rested on a linen form behind glass, its repaired cuffs visible, its faded skirt smoothed, its lower hem preserved where the faint blue stain had once tried to condemn her. Beside it lay the original harebell card, returned to her after Chelsea, and now protected from careless fingers. The flower had faded further, yet it had not disappeared. That seemed to Ottilie a kind of victory. Behind her, Ivo's footsteps crossed the threshold and stopped. He had learned not to enter her silences too quickly. "Is it too much?" he asked. She looked back at him. "You ask that as if you don't already know you have made it exactly enough. I had assistance. Lady Haverston bullied the carpenter. My aunt calls it guidance. Nancy calls it a campaign." "Nancy is accurate," Ottilie smiled. It came more easily now, not because the past had softened, but because it no longer ruled every room before she entered it. Her life had not become a fairy tale in the 2 months since Chelsea. Justice, she had discovered, was practical before it was poetic. Mr. Halerwick had taken the cordial glass into legal custody, along with the apothecary ledger copy, the singed register page, the blue-stained brush, and the pressed foxglove leaf. The original bell and rook ledger remained with the apothecary, guarded now by a man much more alert to gentlemen who purchased danger under initials. Alpheus Crane had not been dragged dramatically through the streets because England preferred its punishments wrapped in procedures and debts. But he had been served notice, questioned, and made suddenly unpopular among men who disliked scandal only when it touched their own credit. His gaming friends had become forgetful. His invitations had thinned. His name, once spoken with amusement, was now spoken beside solicitor, account, and enquiry. Lady Sabella Crane had not vanished. Women like Sabella rarely vanished. They diminished by inches, then pretended the room had grown small. Haverston patronage circles no longer received her. 2 committees had quietly removed her from their subscription lists. A botanical breakfast in Richmond had returned her acceptance with regrets so formal they might as well have been carved on stone. Sir Barnabas had fared worse in the private ledger of consequence. The settlement protecting Ottilie's portion had been examined, clarified, and secured through Mr. Halerwick's intervention and Lady Haverston's relentless memory for family arrangements. Sir Barnabas had protested until he realized protest required documents he had neglected and witnesses who no longer found him impressive. He still lived at Lydgate House. He still spoke of dignity, but fewer people listened. When he entered rooms now, some remembered how readily he had offered his own daughter to a lie in order to preserve a connection with the Cranes. That memory followed him more faithfully than any footman. Ottilie felt no triumph in his loneliness. She felt something quieter and cleaner. Release. Ivo came to stand beside her before the glass case. Not too near until she shifted her hand toward him. He noticed, as he always noticed, and took it with a gentleness that had not grown careless with permission. They were formally betrothed now, after weeks of calls, supervised drives, letters properly sent, and Lady Haverston's satisfied supervision. Society could say many things about their attachment, and it had, but no one could say Ottilie had been hidden. Ivo had courted her in drawing rooms, gardens, libraries, and committee meetings. He had asked her opinion in public and disagreed with her in public, which she found more flattering than blind agreement. He had introduced her to gardeners by name and to patronesses by accomplishment. Once, when an elderly lord praised him for encouraging her little talent, Ivo had replied, "I do not encourage genius. I try to avoid obstructing it." Ottilie had nearly loved him aloud in front of a fern case. She had waited until the carriage. Waiting had its own pleasures now. "Your father sent a note," Ivo said. "I know. Nancy told me. He asks whether you might call next week. He asks whether I might make his defeat look less complete." "Yes. What did you answer?" "Nothing. It was addressed to you." She looked at him then, and the old ache stirred, not as a wound reopening, but as a scar remembering weather. "You did not answer for me." "No, not even to refuse him, especially not that." The room grew still around them. On the nearest wall, her drawing of the harebell caught the morning light, every fine line of stem and bell visible. Ivo lifted her gloved hand and kissed her fingers, not as performance, for there were no guests yet, but as a private punctuation to a promise he had been keeping since the day he learned the difference between a wall and a shelter. "I love you still," he said. The words were quiet. They had been said before, in the open door of a glass house, with the taste of truth still sharp in the air. Hearing them now, after documents, consequences, family anger, formal visits, and ordinary mornings, moved her more deeply. Love that survived ceremony and arrangements had a steadier beauty than love born only at a climax. Ottilie leaned her shoulder lightly against his arm. "Then love me plainly." His thumb brushed once over her knuckles. "Always. And when I am difficult, with interest. When I correct you, with gratitude after a small internal struggle. When I wear unfashionable blue." He looked at the dress behind glass, then at the woman beside him. "With reverence, though I reserve the right to dislike the people who made it necessary." She laughed softly. The sound filled the herbarium room without apology. Then the first guests arrived below, their voices rising through the house in a wave of expectation. Lady Haverston's cane tapped somewhere in the hall. Nancy's quick steps followed, no longer frightened but busy with importance, for she had become Ottilie's personal maid in truth, and would accompany her to Haverston after the marriage. Ottilie took one last look at the dress. It had not been transformed into beauty by glass. It had been allowed to tell the truth. It had been the garment in which her father tried to shame her, the garment in which Sabella tried to frame her, the garment in which Ivo first saw not ruin but honesty. Now it stood preserved, not as a relic of suffering, but as evidence that dignity could survive being misnamed. The door opened, and Lady Haverston appeared with 3 patronesses, 2 gentlemen, and the garden clerk from Chelsea, who bowed to Ottilie with sincere respect. One patroness moved at once toward the harebell drawing. "Lady Ottilie, the committee has been speaking of your labels all week. They are clear without being dull. That is a rarer gift than most poets imagine." Another stopped before the blue dress, her expression changed by recognition. "This is the dress." Ottilie felt Ivo's hand remain steady around hers. She did not need him to answer. "Yes," she said, "this is the dress, and you have kept it?" "I have honored it." The woman nodded slowly, and no one laughed. No one murmured worst. No one asked why it had not been hidden in a trunk. The room accepted the answer because Ottilie had given it, and because the truth, once fully spoken, had altered the manners of everyone forced to hear it. Later, when the guests had admired the drawings, examined the specimen drawers, and requested copies of her notes for the Chelsea labels, Ottilie closed the glass case herself. The small click of the latch sounded final in the bright room. Ivo stood beside her, waiting, not leading until she turned. Through the open doors, the garden beyond Haverston House glowed in early summer green. No costume waited there, no chair in shadow, no father's command, no fan hiding a label. Ottilie placed the key to the herbarium case in her reticule, slipped her hand into Ivo's, and walked with him into the garden, wearing no disguise at all.